Chapter 592. Time flowed noiselessly under extreme concentration. He was 30 meters deep underground, and he didn't know the changes of day and night. Luo Nan just used the experimental mission as a yardstick. Oh, it was a bit shameless to call it an experiment right now. He just followed the requirements of the virtual brain system and tried to assemble usable combat equipment using components from Earth's technology. Luo Nan occasionally raised his head, only to see that it was 2 o'clock in the morning on the 21st. It was already the winter solstice. Today had quite the significance in the East Asian cultural circles. In the past, his family would gather together, no matter what on this day. But today, Luo Nan had used the rotten excuse of concentrated training to run away. One could imagine the unbearable scene when he returned home. This thought only flashed in Luo Nan's mind for a moment before it was squeezed out of existence by the flood of information. Right now, the number of virtual and real interfaces before his eyes had already increased to 4. They included the projected work area, the virtual brain system equipment interface, the user manual. In addition, there was a self-inspection interface that had been opened midway. It was labeled Electromagnetic Vanguard Number 1. Right now, the self-inspection progress was nearing its end. The preliminary inspection results had already been arranged in succession, including the relevant analysis. It took up most of his attention. The left arm module has been completely destroyed. I need to replace it. The backup energy furnace has fallen off. I need to recognize this. It's the fault of my design. The outer armor is corroded. I need to replace part of it. The combat blade. I need to bring 2 more spares. It's too easy to break. The kinetic energy arsenal. Large caliber ammunition and javelins. I need to calculate the ratio again. The consumption is too great. I suggest replenishing nearby. Where is nearby? Luo Nan scratched his head. His fingertips bumped against his headband, which was already a bit warm. He subconsciously changed directions, repeating this process over and over again. The 2 large boxes of spare parts that Shui Lei and the others had sent over were originally sorted and stored in the warehouse by the artificial intelligence. Right now, Luo Nan used his half-baked skills and train of thought to dismantle them into a messy mess. Luckily, the military-grade artificial intelligence that cost him 50 honor points to rent was still worth the price. The virtual brain system hidden deep within the external neuron displayed superior intelligence. As time passed, the collected data was relatively complete, and the progress was finally on the right track. And right now, it was already 5 o'clock in the morning. The multifunctional robot shuttled back and forth between the laboratory and the even more spacious passageway area in front of it, categorizing and arranging his completed works one by one. They were of different sizes and covered a large area. When Luo Nan walked out of the jungle of mechanical arms, he saw the equipment area that took up 40 to 50 square meters. He sucked in a breath of cold air. Isn't there too much? I can't carry it all at once. Flag bearer, calculate the weight. Flag bearer was the code name of the military-grade artificial intelligence. It was the main butler of the laboratory, responsible for the allocation of all resources and basic operations. The relevant data was also readily available. The weight of the equipment is 657.5 kilograms, and the estimated weight of the box is 724 kilograms. As expected, it's time to split them up. Shui Lei and the others had brought over a ton of spare parts and materials. They had been condensed to this degree, and this was already Luo Nan's highest level. Plus, there were also large amounts of ammunition and consumables that were irreplaceable. Luo Nan didn't waste any more energy. He snapped his fingers. Divide the boxes into 4 batches. Each batch must be under 200 kilograms. The main structural components are prioritized. Oh, there's also the remote maintenance system. Pack it up as well. This counts separately. Following Luo Nan's command, the multifunctional robots controlled by the flag bearer rolled their caterpillar belts to get busy once more. Luo Nan stared from the side. He watched as he imitated, designed, and forged the equipment modules and replacement components were loaded into the airdrop boxes one after another. It would be an exaggeration to say that Luo Nan felt a sense of accomplishment in his heart. But the feeling of solidity that was built up bit by bit was something that nothing could replace. 7 days had passed since the lecture on the 14th. Luo Nan had been preparing at all times during these 7 days. He was going to carry out an assassination operation of the highest difficulty. He had personally set up a guillotine, forged shackles, sharpened blades, and increased his preparations bit by bit. All for the final instant when his hand rose and fell. The one he wanted to behead was undoubtedly Gong Qi. He was a spiritual type extraordinary who is currently tossing and turning in the cloud world anchored by his mother. He was one of the top 100 strongest people in the world. Though Luo Nan already had the departed soul of an extraordinary under his hands, he wouldn't overestimate himself because of this. After all, Her Majesty Empress Wu wouldn't take the lead again. She would first beat the enemy to a pulp, injuring his mind. He only had one chance to kill such a powerful enemy. If he missed this chance, the situation would slip to an uncontrollable level. He might even be killed instead. Luo Nan told himself to have patience and determination. He needed to constantly increase his bargaining chips. He also needed to think of ways to weaken Gong Qi's foundation by every possible means. From his perspective, the two were organically unified. In the end, his plan was inseparable from his own ability and the accumulation of bargaining chips. His accumulation wasn't limited to sparring with Ghost Eye. The packing of precision equipment was a large field of study. The complex environment he was about to face put extremely high demands on him. Luo Nan was quite at ease with Standard Bearer, a military-grade AI, doing the calculations. So he set everything aside for the time being. He walked to the living area in the corner of the laboratory and lay down on a single bed. He closed his eyes and adjusted his breathing. Luo Nan finally knew about the matter of Bro Octopus and He Wayne, as well as the matter of Luo Nan's security team drugging him. Luo Nan didn't care about the nature of the matter. What he cared about was the result. He saw that it was the drugging that helped him extricate himself from his extreme exhaustion. It allowed the scattered light of his high-tension state to gather once more. In the end, he realized a major breakthrough. He still couldn't enjoy it to this day. So Luo Nan began to adjust his state of mind and work and rest. He strived to take out a complete period of rest every day. After the lecture on the 14th, his skyrocketed reputation and enormous profit potential had truly diluted the negative effects of the 2000th incident. It gave him some leeway to buffer. Luo Nan meditated and visualized right now. Within the visualization space that seemed to be deep space, stars converged together. It was as if a person was dancing and dancing with joy. The structure of the character, I, was muddled within the visualization diagram of the star atlas. It formed a dense cluster of galaxies that spun in the void. It was as if it was the center of the universe. Luo Nan's consciousness also merged within, embedding itself in the most core position. It seemed to wander unhurriedly around, everywhere. Luo Nan gradually entered a wonderful state of meditative forgetfulness, without thought or worry. It was already 8:00 in the morning by the time he woke up. 3 hours of high-quality rest had restored his physical strength and energy to full capacity. He passed through the jungle of robotic arms once more and arrived at a spacious and empty area. The modules, components, and ammunition consumables, along with the remote repair system that he had specially requested, were neatly stacked within the 6 airdrop crates. The crates were opened, awaiting Luo Nan's final inspection. Luo Nan checked the list seriously once to confirm that there were no mistakes. In the end, he stopped before the first airdrop crate that was scheduled to be delivered. The entire crate only had a single module installed. The overall outline was extremely close to a human torso. It was like an exoskeleton assembled armor. But Luo Nan knew very well that the interior of the armor had already been stuffed to the brim by the energy furnace and the transmission system. Even Jerry couldn't fit inside. Luo Nan extended his hand to caress the torso module. At the same time, a virtual window labeled Electromagnetic Vanguard 1 was projected onto his retina, conducting a final inspection. Of course, this module wasn't meant for human use. It wasn't a wearable device. It was a design that was completely different from the idea of exoskeleton armor. And the control terminal of this design came from the headband that Luo Nan wore. It was the god-binding headband that was displayed in the virtual brain system. Oh, I hope this toy can endure more tossing and turning. Even if it was only temporary, it couldn't be changed every day. In the end, his level as a designer wasn't high enough. Luo Nan sighed. He patted the outer armor of the module and stood up. The multifunctional robot that was already waiting to the side came forward to carry out the final sealing of the crate. After everything was done, Luo Nan picked up one of the crates and gave it a feel. He nodded. There shouldn't be any problems. The 200-kilogram airdrop crate was only one size smaller than the crate that Shuele and the others had brought over yesterday. The average person really wouldn't be able to lift it. For Luo Nan, who was already awakened, this bit of weight was nothing. But what he had to do next was far more difficult than lifting the crate by 100 times. Luo Nan took a deep breath and just sat cross-legged in front of the 6 airdrop crates. He extended his hand to support the first crate that was about to be delivered. His eyes were half closed, and the position of his mind rose in an instant. He suddenly passed through 30 meters of ground and crossed 1,000 meters in the air. A thought floated in the air above Xia City. It was the highest level of traffic. He looked down from high above and overlooked the enormous city within the thin morning mist. He could see tens of thousands of high-rise buildings distributed within a 200-kilometer radius. They formed the main structure of Xia City. 200 million residents lived within this steel jungle. They were like insects crawling within the branches and leaves of the vines. Together, they formed the entire ecology of Xia City. Expanding outwards, there was the boundless ocean to the east. The 4 satellite cities of Xia City were distributed in a ring in the north, south, and south directions. There was also a military defense line further out. The outermost area was close to 300 kilometers away from the center of Xia City. This was also the limit of the entire Xia City metropolitan area. If one looked further out, the open sea was not counted. The inland area was a vast plain and fertile land. Before the era of distortion, there used to be a bustling city with a dense population. Presently, it was already a desolate land where mutants wreaked havoc. There was such a clear boundary between prosperity and desolation. But on a more macroscopic level, it was only a part of this planet's ecosystem. To put it more broadly, it was nothing more than a speck of dust within this space and time. Chapter 593. There were at least 5 or 6 different space-time structures distributed within the range of Luo Nan's mental senses. This included the Earth that bore and gave birth to Luo Nan. It even included the most grand universe that stretched out endlessly. It also included the mysterious cloud world. If one were to lower the standard even further, Xia City and its surrounding extraordinaries had their own unique laws and laws. Though they were not stable, Xia City and its surrounding extraordinaries had their own unique laws and laws. Of course, this also included Luo Nan, who was the origin of the large coordinate system that continued to spread out. There were also 2 other relatively unique existences. One was the psychic wave network that covered Xia City and its surroundings. Some of its tentacles extended to the entire world. This network had been operated by President Ouyang for many years. Even though it was mostly used as a communication network, when it formally interfered with the material plane, its laws were strict and strict. It was a body of its own, not inferior to any extraordinary domain. The other was the unique building where Luo Nan's fleshly body resided. It was Gear. From Luo Nan's perspective, there was a domain quietly taking form with Gear as its axis. It used a single gear to drive a myriad of orders. From near to far, from real to virtual, it combed and operated the chaotic and disorderly energy and information between heaven and earth. It coupled and organized, gathering astonishing energy in silence. It projected a long chain that anchored the distant space-time, erecting a bridge that linked the 2 worlds. Such space-time laws were in no way inferior to those of the extraordinary domain. They even surpassed them in terms of level and scope. This was his mother's work. It was indeed like a feng shui layout, but it was also a domain that possessed its own laws. It was a grand, extraordinary configuration. At this very moment, Luo Nan was using the laws of gear to do something that even extraordinaries would find hard to do. He roughly observed the surrounding environment and confirmed that there were already extraordinaries overflowing in Xia City. For the time being, there weren't any major powers paying attention to him. After the cage theory came out, contact is invasion became a hot phrase in the inner world. There were even people from the Ability User Society who jointly proposed to enact a Privacy Act. The content was probably to restrict the willful casting of psychic ability user senses and so on. Let's not talk about whether or not this purely eye-catching act had any meaning. The mental senses and lock-ons of extraordinaries were much more cautious and conservative than usual in this sensitive period, especially for Luo Nan. This really did give Luo Nan ample space. It also made him more daring and reckless when he did things. Luo Nan's thoughts plunged in the opposite direction, cast towards the gear that seemed to be spinning yet not spinning in the depths of the jungle of the North Bank. And at this time, an incorporeal and mystical structure opened up in the depths of the void, forming a passageway that led straight to the distant space-time. The passageway pulled Luo Nan's thoughts over, and in the blink of an eye, an unstoppable gale and cloud assaulted his face. In a certain sense, the cloud world was simply Luo Nan's own back garden. If those two unwelcome guests weren't here, then it would be even more deserving of its reputation. The thought that Luo Nan projected was like a kite fluttering leisurely in the air. It made a turn within the turbulent clouds. It was just a turn, but the environment of the void where it was located was painted with other colors. Clouds surged high up in the sky at this moment, clearly reflecting the image of a jungle and the buildings hidden within. To be exact, it was the jungle of the north shore of Acumen College, where Luo Nan currently resided. This image faded to almost nothingness. It was undoubtedly a mirage. And in just half a second, colors were added to this mirage scene. A rough reddish-black background could be faintly seen. The shape of an undulating mountainous region was faintly discernible. There was also dark red lava that spread and flowed. Two completely different scenes of nothingness mixed together with the surging clouds high up in the sky. The colors were mottled, and it was dazzling to the eye. A mushmouth ape just so happened to pass by nearby. It was also bewitched by this marvelous scene. It bared its teeth and rushed over, seeming to want to touch this marvelous scene. Luo Nan's hand, which was supporting the airdrop box in the underground 6th floor of gear, didn't move at all. He just slightly tightened his brows. The word, "I," that was resplendent with starlight within his visualized space, seemed to truly come alive. It folded its hands, bent its knees, and spun and danced. The myriad stars that converged to form the word, "I," blended into one entity, and they each formed their own star orbits. They drew a boundless star atlas in the deep void. Luo Nan's soul strength, which he had accumulated explosively over the past few days, circulated and transformed within this star atlas. It naturally converged and fused, condensing into an indistinct and immeasurable point at the very center of the star atlas. It became the sole origin of the vast coordinate system, and it couldn't be moved. When this coordinate system took form, Luo Nan's mind, the laboratory he resided in, the cloud world of another space-time continuum, and even the rough and gloomy nameless mountainous region clearly rang with a muffled roar of thunder. When the sound of thunder crushed down, gear, the cloud world, and the nameless mountainous region. These three space-time structures had always operated according to their own laws and rules. They froze in an instant. It was only for an instant. Perhaps it was 1,000th of a second, or even 10,000th of a second. Then they recovered their fixed operating trajectories. But in that instant of freezing, the airdrop box that Luo Nan's hand pressed down on became the only moving object. This so-called movement was not the ordinary form of sliding, dropping, or flying. In that instant, the light and shadow of its body warped. It was like a mirage, and it suddenly disappeared. The two intersecting scenes of the mirage in the cloud world disappeared as well. So much so that the mushed-mouthed ape could only stare blankly at the thick layer of clouds that hadn't changed for many years after charging over. Luo Nan's eyes were still half closed, but his mind was a thread ahead of time. He set off from the origin and drew a long, perfectly straight line. He imprinted a point on the large coordinate system. The coordinates of that point was his designated destination. The line was flat and straight. It didn't bend in the slightest. But in this moment, the airdrop box that crossed space drew an indescribably complex trajectory in the dark and unfathomable void. It pierced through the barrier of space and time twice in succession. Only then did its short and gorgeous journey come to an end. It truly possessed powerful kinetic energy. It carried the whooshing sound of the wind as it descended diagonally to the ground from a height of several dozen meters in midair. The air it pierced through already carried the fishy smell of rotten eggs. This was the result of the long years of accumulation of sulfides and halide gases that were spewed out by the intense volcanic activity. The airdrop box's journey was nearing its end. All that remained was time for the show of universal gravitation. Luo Nan's eyelids blinked, but they didn't completely open. In this moment, his originally vigorous and abundant soul's strength was like the water of a lake that had its bottom completely ruptured. The water level dropped by more than half in an instant. The excessively terrifying output of soul strength caused his brain to experience a short period of dizziness. But he couldn't afford to rest. His consciousness locked tightly onto the falling airdrop box. He calculated its position and distance on the plane of his soul cloak. The airdrop box's shock absorber equipment automatically activated when it felt the movement of the box. It attempted to correct its posture and weaken the impact. But before these equipment could truly display their use, a figure leaped up from a certain fissure in the ground diagonally below. The figure rose into the air and firmly grabbed the falling airdrop box before landing on the ground with ease. Chapter 594. Though he was vexed, he still had to do the work that needed to be done. Luo Nan spent an entire morning to send 5 of the 6 airdrop boxes over. Actually, in terms of pure soul strength consumption and replenishment, it wasn't hard to replenish it under the effect of the closed-system large production line, even though the consumption of soul strength was enormous. What was truly troublesome was the amount of energy consumed during this period of time. It was truly immeasurable. Luo Nan didn't dare to forcefully do this sort of thing. He did his best to follow his normal routine and eat the breakfast and lunch that Rui would send over. He took a short nap before sending the last box of ammunition and consumables away. It was already 1:00 in the afternoon. Luo Nan only gasped for breath before opening up the electronic map. He set it to a 3-dimensional panoramic mode and studied the schedule for this afternoon. He suddenly felt something in his heart when he was pondering with a frown. He turned his head and saw Rui 1, who had been resting here in the afternoon. She stood quietly to the side, concentrating on looking at the map. The plump Jerry was squatting on her shoulder in a rare moment of honesty, his long tail wagging back and forth. Luo Nan laughed. What? Curious about that side? He never hid anything from Rui Wen, and he was very confident in Rui Wen's ability to keep secrets. This was a tacit understanding between the two. Of course, Luo Nan also admitted that his plan wouldn't have succeeded without Rui Wen's participation. Rui Wen turned her head and asked softly, "Should I go too?" It was quite rare for this little girl to open her mouth and speak. Though Luo Nan's mind was full of thoughts, his mood relaxed quite a bit. He laughed even more happily. "You can go if you want, but today is Friday. It's still school time. You didn't go." How could a child speak such big truths? Luo Nan was a bit embarrassed. Though he wasn't a good student in the past, he was still a well-behaved child. He went to school on time, did experiments, and stayed up late at night. But now he had waded into the muddy waters of the inner world. He was faced with life and death struggles, blades and swords, and the pressure of time and tide waiting for no man. The school curriculum could only be chuckled in comparison. Well, wasn't this a bad example for Rui Wen? Luo Nan hadn't considered such matters before, but ever since he had that conversation with Imoya that night, a corresponding sense of responsibility had awakened. He felt a mountain of pressure for a time. Rue 1. It's like this. We students need to study properly and make progress every day. This is a critical period, and I have no choice but to do this. After this matter is settled, I will definitely study hard. Otherwise, how can I cough? Luo Nan had forcefully swallowed back the words, get a fine society. It suddenly occurred to him that not only was this cliché meaningless, but it was also an extremely crude lie to members of the inner world like them. Although Rue, when was autistic, she was very smart, Luo Nan had always believed that. Luo Nan was stumped for 2 seconds before forcefully changing the direction. What I'm trying to say is that the experiences at school are extremely precious and important. They are an indispensable part of our entire lives. Luo Wenyi to Luo Li Lud to Shi to Hi Hi to. It was also at this moment that the way of thinking that he had developed over the years automatically helped him shift onto the right track. My grandfather, and of course your grandfather, the one we visited at the sanatorium last weekend. In his formatting theory, there is a section on student related to the social format. You can imagine how important it is. For now, you just need to remember. Only by fully observing and delving into the present environment, from home to school to society, can you have your own experiences. Only then will you be able to form a complete personality. This is what distinguishes us from other people. This is the basis for normal communication. This is the foundation for establishing oneself. Wasn't what he said a bit deep? Rue when asked him right as Luo now was pondering, is my personality incomplete?
Huh?
Rue when gazed at him. My memory is very short. My experiences are very few. I'm different from other people. In that case, my personality would be incomplete.
How can you say that?
Luo Nan retorted in a loud voice in the first instant. But then he was stuck once more. Rue Wen's deduced conclusion wasn't wrong. This was already the confirmed conclusion of the branch's laboratory. But he couldn't admit it no matter what. Luo Nan hadn't sweated as much as he did right now, even though he had toiled for an entire morning to transport a 1-ton item 2,000 kilometers away. At this moment, he just wanted to kidnap a child psychologist to use as a reference. Rue Wen was still gazing at him. Luo Nan had always felt that those gloomy eyes shouldn't belong to a child. They were so deep and unfathomable. But now that he thought about it again, it might be more accurate to describe them as emptiness. Rue Wen still couldn't find her own position. Did she still think of herself as a crow? Luo Nan's heart felt even more stuffy. He wanted to give himself a slap. This mouth. No, this IQ. Actually, the one with an incomplete personality should be him, right?
Huh?
Suddenly, a light flashed in Luo Nan's mind. He didn't think too deeply and just blurted out that it's very normal to have an incomplete personality. I'm not perfect right now either. This is because we're still children. We haven't reached adulthood yet. But our personalities are always developing. In terms of knowledge, in terms of learning, in terms of interpersonal relationships, the more we observe, the more we interact, the more we deal with. Only then will we be endlessly perfected. Luo Nan didn't know whether or not this was considered consolation, but he decided to keep Rue Wen company. He wanted to let her know that she wasn't a lonely and alienated person in this world. It's not a problem if my memory is missing. I remember everything I did before I was 10 years old. After that, it was all experiments. Experiments.
Experiments.
Just thinking about it makes me regret it. Luo Nan was basically speaking without thinking. He was worried that he wouldn't be able to stop himself. He rushed to make a conclusion. So, we need to make up for our lessons right now. Not only do we need to make up for our lessons in knowledge, we also need to make up for our lessons in interpersonal relationships. It hasn't been long since you joined the class. You need to pay attention to building a good relationship with your classmates. Okay, it's fine to be an invisible person, but you need to pay attention to your observations. Skipping classes is also a type of experience, but it's still too radical. Rue Wen blinked her eyes. This small movement removed a bit of the oppressive feeling from her gaze. It gave her a bit of a cute flavor. Rue, one had already begun to grow her hair out under the strong request of Mrs. Luo Shuqing and teacher Emoya. She had accumulated 2 months of sleep and had been styled by a famous designer. She had a cool androgynous style, but she had also softened the contours of her facial features. According to Emoya, a professional, it had the effect of killing both men and women. Luo Nan was a bit convinced now, but he didn't dare to relax. He continued to do his best to convince her. You'll be teaching in small classes at the middle school level. You'll be able to see who you're missing with a single glance. When the time comes, teacher will give aunt and uncle a call, and the 2 of us will have to eat the cake together. Come, act as a perfect cover for your brother. This way our relationship will be even firmer, and our family relations will be handled perfectly. In the end, Luo Nan still revealed his true intentions. He pushed Rue when outside. You'll first catch up to my progress in supplementary classes. Then we'll work hard together and supervise each other. We'll perfect each other's personalities. This is what a good brother and sister should be like. A good family. Luo Nan already didn't know what nonsense he was babbling about. Luckily, Rue Wen was very obedient. She basically wouldn't refuse Luo Nan's arrangements. She was pushed into the elevator by Luo Nan just like that. Oh right. You don't need to deliver food tonight. I'm busy. Luo Nan finally let out a long breath as he watched Rue Wen ride the elevator up. He turned his head to look at the empty laboratory area. He still had a lingering fear. He made a firm resolution. He would definitely ask He Wayne to help him find a senior psychologist to seriously solve the problem Rue Wen was currently facing.
He did what he said.
He deliberated over his words for a bit and left a message for He Wayne on the psychic wave network. She was probably still busy. She didn't immediately respond. Luo Nan didn't wait any longer. He composed himself and walked back to the laboratory area to deal with some loose ends. Everything was in order half an hour later. He followed his predetermined plan and walked to the lounge. He activated the completely sealed simulation chamber that he had specially purchased. Luo Nan was able to truly calm his mind within the tight and sealed environment of the chamber. His mind flowed along the soul cloak that practically surrounded the earth. He followed the predetermined coordinates to a reference object, and with a large leap, he arrived at an area 2,000 kilometers away. This was a dry cave located within a mountain. The temperature was maintained at around 40 degrees. It was originally just a relatively large rock crevice. Later, Mo Luan, who was stationed here, forcefully carved out a hidden space to serve as a forward operating base. Mo Luan sat cross-legged in a corner of the forward operating base right now. A maintenance robot was busy at work. The various module parts that had been sent over had already been assembled and replaced on the simple and crude workbench. The maintenance work had already been completed. Right now, only a few minor details were being handled. The electromagnetic vanguard one was undoubtedly on the workbench. Its overall appearance was similar to that of the exoskeleton-clad military police. If a professional familiar with military equipment were to look at it, it would be very easy to discover that this was actually a standard NCOX-2 humanoid robot platform. This type of robot was actually quite rare in the military. Its practicality wasn't high, but it suited Luo Nan's needs very well. He borrowed the existing platform to carry out modifications and processing. After a few days of running in, the external appearance was more or less the same, but the most fundamental operating mechanism was already completely different. Luo Nan adjusted himself to the most comfortable position in the simulation chamber. Let's begin now. Let's strive for 2.5 days to build the foundation. Luo Nan's consciousness was transferred to the divine binding hoop through the virtual brain system. He issued a clear command: core mode implantation. At the same time as Luo Nan issued the command, the wraith sign shuttling through the clouds froze in another part of space and time. It was as if the wraith sign had become a world of its own. The flowing bloody light and lava above the towering structure of the Blood Soul Temple flowed even faster. There is only a single seed imprint within the 4th floor of the temple hall. It transformed into light under the pressure of this internalized force, piercing through the void once more. A thousandth of a second later, the seed imprint accurately pierced into the forward operating base inside the mountain. It hovered for a bit inside the room. Then, under Luo Nan's command, it was thrown into the anthropomorphic head armor of the electromagnetic Vanguard 1. There were large amounts of sensory instruments, auxiliary computing systems, and so on integrated here. And within this space, where every inch of land was worth its weight in gold, there was a square piece of metal lying horizontally. It was the size of an infant's fist, and it tumbled back and forth under the effect of magnetic force. It was completely different from the other components of the instrument. The seed imprint was directly inserted into it. Chapter 595. Core Mode Implantation, Initiating System Self-Check. Insufficient automatic core component, indicating power output of 3 bars. In the eye sockets of the fully enclosed helmet, the gathered electricity dimmed down again, leaving only 2 weak spots of light, like the residual heat of metal after high-temperature processing. Luo Nan obtained the latest test results from the virtual brain interface and the window of the divine binding hoop. To be honest, it wasn't very ideal. 3 boxes. As expected, I lost some of what I collected yesterday. Luo Nan was unable to understand the power units of the virtual brain system and the soul binding hoop. He found it troublesome to translate, so he simply displayed it in graphical mode. The graphical interface showed that 10 grids were full, and the current indicating power had reached 3 grids. There was still a gap of nearly half to the basic line of 5 grids to activate the battle machinery. Luo Nan wasn't surprised by this result. Didn't he come all this way for the sake of solving the problem? He continued to issue commands, and the virtual brain system smoothly connected to the spirit binding hoop and gave feedback. Manual activation of remote control mode. Initiating mental link. Synchronization rate 73%, 82%, 97%. Synchronization complete. Current delay 0.2 milliseconds. In this moment, Luo Nan's thick soul strength joined with the seed imprint that had just been transplanted into the electromagnetic Vanguard's head armor. A circle of electricity circulated and diffused, transforming into a brand new interference mode. The metal block that carried the seed imprint also became very stable. It no longer rolled randomly and formed a certain rotation pattern. In the hollow eye sockets of electromagnetic Vanguard 1, electric sparks flickered once more. Very soon, its control system was fully activated. The energy, transmission, perception, and other modules were connected one by one, allowing this combat machine to continuously turn its head, swing its arms, and bend and extend its arms. Then, like a normal person, it lightly jumped off the workbench. Luo Nan lay quietly within the simulation chamber, but his mental plane was extremely active. It was he who possessed the electromagnetic Vanguard number 1 and performed all of the above actions. This was an expedient measure before the seed imprint took root and sprouted, but it was still an interesting experience. It was similar to the real-life version of Frost River reality. It was also an advanced version of remote mechanical control. Of course, there were even more wondrous places inside. Although the power of the seed imprint was low, it was not idle. It was still using a special method to observe all of this with clairvoyance. It was trying to coordinate and respond through Luo Nan. Luo Nan was controlling number 1, but he was also cooperating with number 1. They were together in the forward operating base. At this time, other than paying attention to the core components, Luo Nan was also inspecting the other components and the overall situation of the system. He was making fine adjustments according to specific problems. The maintenance robot that was specially sent over became the busiest one, following number 1. Luo Nan didn't do these things himself. After all, his reserves of knowledge in this area weren't enough. In the underground laboratory of Gear, the one responsible for the overall allocation of resources and basic operations was the military-grade AI flagbearer. And in this forward operating base, the one carrying out the corresponding missions was the external neuron. This miraculous creation, whose origins were still unclear to this day, displayed an extraordinary level of intelligence. Its overwhelming control over Earth's technology was perfectly reflected here. After about 40 minutes of testing, the effectiveness of the electromagnetic vanguard system and the operation of the modules were basically in the normal range, and they had successfully passed the various traps created by the novice designer. As for the deeper problems, they could only be tested in practice. Right now, it was already 3 in the afternoon. Luo Nan decided to leave the cave. Set out. Number 1 headed outside. Concealment had already been taken into consideration when constructing the forward operating base. There were also some geological problems, so the passageway leading outside was rather winding. Many places were barely passable. This could also be considered a test of the electromagnetic vanguard's control. At first, this remote-controlled combat machine had some friction with the volcanic rocks on all sides. Occasionally, sparks would burst out, but soon, the sound of friction and scraping disappeared without a trace. This wasn't just because Luo Nan was used to controlling combat machines. This included the core seed imprint's grasp of the external environment. It quickly became sharp and reasonable. 2 minutes later, the electromagnetic vanguard number 1 passed through a stream of semi-solidified lava. Sunlight could already be seen shining down ahead. This place was a time zone away from Xia City. It was roughly around 2 in the afternoon. Even though the weather wasn't good, there was still dusky sunlight shining down. There was the exit. Number 1 slid down again. The dust from the magnetic levitation's recoil was still swirling. The foul air within the narrow and cramped passageway began to stir restlessly. An unforeseen event had occurred. A 4-legged, short-tailed, scaled monster leaped out from the stream of semi-solidified lava that number 1 had just passed through. It displayed outstanding explosive power. The faint sound of tumbling lava could be heard. Its sharp blade-like tongue had already pierced through the connection between number 1's armor and helmet. But at this moment, crackling electric flames leaped up from number 1's all-metal body. The air hummed and vibrated, so much so that the surrounding bumpy rock strata trembled and cracked. A short hissing sound came from the scaled monster's throat. This fellow didn't even have time to spit out corrosive venom from its tongue before number 1's magnetic field suddenly expanded outwards. It lost its target and direction in a muddle-headed manner, flinging itself over number 1's shoulder. Number 1's limbs didn't move. The direction of the electric field's intensity instantly changed. It formed a powerful blade-like arc of electricity that directly bombarded the scaled monster's body. Under the high pressure, the scaled monster was instantly turned into charcoal. Number 1's gliding speed didn't even change after this counterattack. It continued to move toward the area illuminated by the dusky sunlight. As it passed by the scaled monster's corpse, the severely deformed charred corpse burst into flames with a bang. The flames were slightly red and a bit dark. The color of the light was like a layer of tainted blood. But the flames were truly vicious. The scaled monster, which was the length of an adult's arm, was burned to ashes in a short half a second. Only the flames that exploded at the last moment seemed to be affected by the electromagnetic field. The flames chased after number 1's figure, circling around it like a spirit snake. Only then did they extinguish. When the flames were extinguished, the orderly rotating metal cube in number 1's head cavity glowed a bit red. Then it returned to its original state. Luo Nan shot a glance at the window of the god-binding hoop. He saw that the foregrid power meter had no reaction at all. He couldn't help but shake his head. The conversion rate was simply inhumanly low. Not to mention the problem of energy dissipation and loss before a qualitative change was formed. Luo Nan's resolve to complete his plan grew firmer. Number 1 faced the direction of the sunlight at this time. It charged upward, arriving above the mountain where the forward operating base was located. Luo Nan's vision and the senses of the combat machinery's instruments were effectively combined. They were separated into layers, spreading out layer by layer. In this place, there was no feeling of looking down on all the mountains. This volcanic area was overflowing with the smell of sulfur. Not a blade of grass grew in this place. In fact, it was formed from several hundred large and small hills. Every hill could be considered a volcanic crater. Their average height was no more than 200 to 300 meters. Right now, most of them were still emitting flames and smoke. It was as if they could erupt at any time. Oh, it's erupting. Over a dozen kilometers away, a mountaintop suddenly spewed out large amounts of steam. It surged up nearly 100 meters. The surface of the ground seemed to have turned into a viscous mud. It surged and undulated endlessly. There were also enormous bulges that protruded and cracked. Sparks flew chaotically. The cycle repeated itself, and the inner layer faintly emitted the dark red glow of lava. This was a scene that could never be seen in Sia City. The volcanic area where electromagnetic Vanguard number 1 was located nearly 2,000 kilometers southwest of Sia City. It was already close to the western side of the Indochina Peninsula. It was an area where the Eurasian Plate and the Indian Ocean Plate collided. Intense volcanic activity had occurred in the geologic era. And after the start of the Third World War and the arrival of the Age of Distortion, this area was razed to the ground in the most chaotic era. The flames of war and the wanton use of weapons of mass destruction turned this area into scorched earth. And in the process of reconstruction after the war, this area was naturally excluded from the scope of large metropolitan areas due to its poor geographical location. The closest large metropolis to this area was Spring City. It contrasted well with Sia City, and the two were indeed sister cities. Spring City was nearly 500 kilometers away from this area. It couldn't be said to be far, but it was definitely not an area of effective control. In fact, whether it was in the secular society or the inner world, this volcanic area could be considered a taboo. This was because 3 years ago, this place was still a battlefield where extraordinaries bombarded each other. Back then, this volcanic area was the center. Within a range of 2,000 square kilometers, the heavens collapsed and the earth split. It was completely changed beyond recognition. The force of the impact even pierced through the earth's crust, detonating the group of volcanoes underground. It turned the already devastated volcanic area into its current state. Luo Nan knew of one of the extraordinaries who participated in this battle. It was Her Majesty Empress Wu's RT-8313 mission post on headquarters website. It was Mr. Jin Buhuan, the one who hinted that he wanted to act like a rogue against the Empress Wu. Not long after this message was posted, this successful extraordinary businessman engaged in a spectacular battle here. Then he disappeared from everyone's line of sight. Jin Buhuan's disappearance caused a sensation back in the day. It was in no way inferior to the death, of Jin Tong in the outer seas of Sia City. It was just that on the night of the 14th, Luo Nan had used the divine binding hoop to indirectly confirm Jin Tong's death. And Jin Buhuan's life and death had always been a mystery. A year or two after the battle, this place was still a hot area for ability users to explore and excavate. But now it was much more deserted. At the very least, Luo Nan didn't see a single existence other than the various mutant life forms that were always active on the ground and within the lava. This included ability users, normal people, and even the rumored vagabonds of the wilderness. Oh. Chapter 596. The ring-shaped drone somersaulted back and forth within the steam cloud. No matter how miserable it was, it persisted and remained the same. It displayed its extreme stubbornness. After going back and forth a few times, Luo Nan had a general understanding. This should be some kind of field sampling work. From the direction of the electromagnetic waves, the operator was several hundred kilometers away. Perhaps they were still in Spring City. This was a relatively safe method of scientific research. Luo Nan didn't really care. Of course, he didn't want others to pay attention to his actions and cause unnecessary interference. So, he controlled the combat robot to go down from the side of the hill, avoiding any possible surveillance cameras or radar. Those things were still a bit of a hindrance, but the place Luo Nan wanted to go was still quite far. A small detour was nothing. Luo Nan made a detour from the side of the hill. The drone in the sky completed another roll and shuttle within the steam cloud. This time, it swayed and shot out a net-like object. It seemed to encircle some matter that was ejected from the crater of the volcano. Then it turned around and left. The sampling was successful. Luo Nan's mental senses focused a bit. He saw that there were 2 or 3 1-centimeter-long fiery red ants encircled within the specially made fine net. These fellows could be considered large among their species. They were struggling fiercely, but they didn't have many methods to deal with the specially made bug net. The ring-shaped drone accelerated in a straight line, quickly distancing itself from the steam cloud. Clearly, its target here was undoubtedly these ants. The source of interference was gone. 2,000 kilometers away, Luo Nan frowned from within the simulation pod. What a coincidence. The other party was also interested in the Vulcan ants? Oh, this wasn't strange at all. After all, the Vulcan ants were the star mutant species of this volcanic area. They represented a typical mutant species ecology. They had been very popular in recent years. Many research dogs were counting on them to publish papers and graduate. Just take a sample and go back for analysis. It's best if we don't meet again. It was impossible for Luo Nan to make the volcanic area his private hunting ground. With the current level of technological advancement, there would be satellite imaging even if there were no drones. Playing with a single drone was just a dream. He could only eliminate the interference as much as possible. Luo Nan suddenly discovered that the speed of the drone, which was already far away in the horizon, had suddenly slowed down while he was pondering. It swayed back and forth. In the end, it was unable to advance any further. It slowly descended. It seemed that there was a malfunction. Luo Nan's mental senses kept track of it from beginning to end. He saw the struggling appearance of the machine, and he could imagine the unwillingness of the remote controller several hundred kilometers away. It has nothing to do with me. Luo Nan decided to temporarily lower his moral level and ignore the situation over there. He wanted to complete his own plan earlier and calm his mind earlier. The target area of Luo Nan's plan was located 140 kilometers away. The target was over there. The forward operating base was over here. The distance between the two was quite far. It wasn't that Luo Nan was looking for trouble for himself. It was just that the most famous manic zone of the volcanic area was not far away from the forward operating base. Not far from a rather inconspicuous dividing line towards the southwest, in this desolate area that was covered in volcanic ash and lava, piles of bones of different colors appeared. There were even corpses that had not been completely devoured and completely corroded. Not to mention the corpses of the animals. Just by looking at the bones alone, one would be able to see the bones. They were also very strange. Gray, black, white, red, green, and many other colors were mixed together. It was practically impossible to find 2 piles of bones that were more or less the same. Luo Nan crossed the dividing line and went 2 to 3 kilometers in. Finally, a living creature appeared before his eyes. It was a skinny and bony canine creature. Calling it a canine was only a rough estimation based on its outer appearance. The half-rotten fur on its body, as well as its abnormally swollen head and some of its limbs and joints, had already caused this fellow to be severely deformed. It was very hard to distinguish it in detail. Anyone who saw this sort of situation would think that this fellow could fall to the ground at any moment. But when the electromagnetic Vanguard 1 entered the territory of this canine creature, a strangely sharp howl came from its throat. Its 4 limbs exerted force at the same time, and it charged towards the Vanguard 1 like an artillery shell. The half-rotten wounds on the canine creature's body spurted out turbid liquid at practically the same time due to the excessive force exertion. There were even some impurities mixed within. The liquid exploded and dispersed in the instant it left its body. It was as if it brought forth a dark gray and green cloud. Plague Hound. Luo Nan silently recited the name he had given to this canine creature. As for the more authoritative scientific name, sorry, there was no need for that. The electromagnetic Vanguard, one's left arm bent and rose up. The built-in Gauss rifle module sprayed a standard bullet out of the muzzle at high speed under the effect of a powerful electric field. The Plague Hound was still 10 meters away from the Vanguard 1 when the bullet pierced its skull. The enormous kinetic impact caused its entire head and the thick front half of its body to be smashed into smithereens. The exploded limbs and flesh were still in midair when they were scorched by the leaping electric fire. They transformed into strands of green smoke that dissipated into the air. This was certainly not the result that could be achieved with a purely kinetic firearm. The other half of the corpse could be seen to be like the scaly monster in the rock crevice. It was rapidly burned to nothing within the blood-colored flames. Crisp crackling sounds rang from within the flesh and blood of the corpse as it burned. Several dozen 1-centimeter-long fiery red ants attempted to charge out from the flames, but in the end, they were turned to ashes one after another. These ants were exactly the same as the samples captured by the crashed unmanned drone. They were the star mutants of this volcanic area. Vulcan ants. The parasitic state is becoming more and more unstable. According to the research data, this nest of Vulcan ants has reached the time for a new generation. At this time, the ant colony's control is at its weakest, but the queen's combat strength is at its strongest. Excellent. The stronger the better. The current scouting network Luo Nan was using was his mental senses and the AI Vanguard 1's intelligent sensing module, which was constructed together. The layers were rich, and they complemented each other. He soon confirmed that the manic mutants under the parasitic control of the Vulcan ants had received abnormal stimulation from this direction. They had temporarily stopped hunting and killing each other. With a shake of their bodies, they had transformed into loyal and devoted guardians. They swarmed in his direction. This was the result Luo Nan hoped to achieve. Therefore, the electromagnetic Vanguard 1 did not dodge or evade under his control. It continued to advance toward the target area 100 kilometers away according to the previously set route. However, it had only taken a few steps when the Gauss rifle module, which had just achieved success, lifted up once more. The bullet hummed and rumbled as it fired. It struck a perfectly straight diagonal line within the dusky smoke and dust. It accurately struck a large eagle with its wings spread and circling 2 kilometers away. It was nearly 700 meters in the air. The outcome was more or less the same as that of the plague dog. The large eagle was instantly blasted into smithereens. However, what shot out wasn't flesh and blood, but precise mechanical parts. The lightning in Vanguard 1's eye sockets extinguished twice, and Luo Nan retracted his words. Chapter 597. This unforeseen event did not affect Luo Nan's determination to carry out his plan. He checked his energy reserves one last time and confirmed that he could complete a one-way charge under the intense killing. Then, he controlled the combat machine to take large strides and attack in a straight line. At the same time, black smoke that was near nothingness flowed through the gaps between the rock and soil. It was Mo Luan moving stealthily underground. With Luo Nan drawing its attention, it effectively avoided the eyes and ears of the vast majority of the defenders. It rapidly approached the target area. And, at this time, from the perspective of the electromagnetic Vanguard No. 1, it could faintly see an unceasingly approaching gray line ahead. It was a skirmish line formed by several dozen mutants, similar to plague dogs. This was just a small unit. Behind this skirmish line, on the two flanks and even behind the electromagnetic Vanguard No. 1, there were already threats accumulating. The mutants under the control of the Vulcan ants are manifesting more and more clearly in terms of organization and sociality. The conclusion of a certain summary flashed through Luo Nan's mind. It echoed with this phenomenon, but it did not leave a trace in Luo Nan's mind. He still controlled the Gauss rifle module to a single-shot state. He did not seek to block the mutants' assault momentum. He just followed the most precise and efficient method to kill them one by one. This feeling was quite familiar. It was like playing a more realistic Frost River reality game. But what was different from the game was that every time he made a move, the metal block within his head armor would always transmit sets of electrical signals. These were the transliterations of the seed imprint's various judgment reactions. These signals gave the combat machine's computing system a set of judgment options, and they were directly used on Luo Nan's mental plane. They gave him a highly optimized reference plan. As an extraordinary, or more accurately speaking, as the wilderness hunter, Jin Tong, how would he react when faced with this kind of ever-changing situation? The hissing sound of wind brushed in from the flank. A long ochre-red snake, nearly the same color as the surrounding volcanic rocks, leaped up from the ground with its upper body. It clearly wanted to coil around the left arm module that spat out death bullets. But what welcomed it was a blade light that came from an even trickier angle. The long ochre-red snake was cut in half by a single blade strike. The crackling electricity extinguished the life force of the parasitic Vulcan ant within its body at the same time. It was straightforward and efficient. At least 70% of the credit for this blade was due to the stress response of the seed imprint. Luo Nan was more like a guide. The feedback from the imprint of the Jin Tong seed grew stronger and stronger over the course of a few days. It grew faster and faster, giving Luo Nan quite good pointers and benefits. But this was not enough. Far from enough. And that group of people didn't have enough, right? Number 1 fired another shot, shattering a rock a few hundred meters away. Apart from the shattered stone shards, parts of the rock exploded all over the place. That's enough. At the forward supply base of Spring City's western defense line, Meng Tu couldn't help but slap the table. In the wilderness, be it humans or machines, they are all fucking lawless. Hurry up, activate the next set of backup equipment. As a senior officer of the Coastal Defense Force, Meng Tu was assigned a mission to relieve his boredom. It was supposed to be a leisure job similar to traveling, but now it seemed that his unreliable boss was the one who pushed the blame to him. His heart was filled with irritation. He nearly wanted to rip off the chain of discipline, but his many years of military discipline made him suppress this impulse. His voice only grew a bit coarser. You still haven't found out the origins of this X, too? If you want to investigate here, don't overlook the SCA's side. The officer next to him was the commander of this forward supply base, Major Gua. It was hard not to feel a bit awkward being overridden. But the disparity in military rank, the difference between the city defense force and the field army, and especially the distance between burners and normal people, made it impossible for him to say anything. He could only try to raise his presence. This X, too, has clearly undergone major modifications. With such a degree of modification and the methods of those rats of the black market, it's unlikely that we'll be able to find anything. Perhaps we can consider it from the perspective of a highly destructive electromagnetic weapon. Meng Tu shook his head. It's not a simple electromagnetic weapon. That's right. Its modifications are very extreme. I'm saying that it's not just an electromagnetic weapon. Have you ever seen an electromagnetic rifle that can blast apart a mutant with a body of steel in one shot? Perhaps it uses special ammunition, if the density and weight of the ammunition exceeds. But there's no way to explain the intense combustion in the latter half. Speaking of which, Major Gua, the deep blue walkers in Spring City don't have a high conversion rate. Yes. Then I suggest that you find an opportunity to attend a short-term training class in the near future and gain a deeper understanding of the combat methods of the Deep Blue Walkers. It had to be said that Meng Tu wasn't Major Gua's direct superior. This statement sounded extremely harsh, but Major Gua had a good temper. At the very least, he didn't show any anger on the surface. He even humbly asked for guidance. What Senior Colonel Meng means is that this modification is somewhat similar to the Deep Blue Walkers. It's not a modification. It's a technique. This kind of enchantment technique can pour the special power of the format of fire into the ammunition of firearms. I really like using this move, but it's very difficult to accomplish alone. In order to achieve this, one must have extremely high attainments in the field of formatting. Among the people I know, Major General Tian Bang is one of them. There's also that person from the He family. Meng Tu shook his head. You've digressed. What I mean is that this isn't just a matter of military equipment modification. It involves extraordinary power. It's not the format of fire, but an extraordinary power of electromagnetism. But this is clearly a robot. A robot. In the current world, all kinds of demons and ghosts have appeared. At this point, he turned his head to ask the intelligence officer beside him. I asked you to look for a match with the SCA. Have there been any results? The intelligence officer handed over a flexible screen. On it was a list that had just been pulled out. Meng Tu received it, swept his eyes over it, and spat. Is the SCA waiting for the new year? Even that damn Jean Tong can be listed first. Meng Tu looked at the list and couldn't find anything. But because of Jean Tong, he thought of that even more troublesome fellow. His heart grew increasingly irritated, and he slammed the table once more. It was at this time that the adjutant came over to inform him. There's a long-distance meeting at command in 5 minutes. It requires you, Professor Wu, and Professor Ding to participate. The meeting place is in the base's 4th conference room. Meeting all day long. Meng Tu threw the flexible screen on the table and stormed out. Inside the room, Major Gua shrugged his shoulders. He was about to relax his posture when he saw Meng Tu turn around and return. Once the backup surveillance is activated, immediately synchronize the relevant footage to my place. Major Gua reflexively stood at attention. Understood. Only then did Meng Tu leave. It took him a minute to reach the 4th conference room. He had just sat down, and before he even had a drink of water to calm himself down, 2 gray-haired old men came over together. He stood up and greeted them. Professor Wu, Professor Ding. Professor Wu Zhuanliang, who was in his 90s, still had a ruddy complexion. Even after nearly a month in the wilderness, his voice hadn't lowered at all. When he saw Meng Tu, he asked directly. The project team's sampling equipment went out of control, and there was a combat robot at the scene of the incident.
Did you send it there?
Can you guarantee that the sampling results will be back by today? Helpless, Meng Tu could only explain. We're still verifying the situation at the scene. Also, we haven't determined the origin of that combat robot. As he spoke, a signal came from Major Gua's side, synchronizing the footage collected by the 3rd surveillance equipment. Meng Tu thought for a moment, then simply set it to projection mode and reported the situation to the 2 old professors. Before he could say more than 2 words, Wu Zhuanliang saw the NCOX, 2 robot charging forward in a straight line on the projection. He couldn't help but slap the table. Holy *T. This is amazing. What a beautiful kill. Beside him, Professor Ding Jiying, who was much more elegant and quiet, frowned. This will cause new variables to the aberrant ecology near the volcanic area, and the data that is currently being collected will be a mess again. Wu Zhuanliang scoffed at this statement. Aberrants are a mess to begin with. You're daydreaming if you want to do static research. Speaking of which, old Ding, your mindset should change. In the past, you worked on the ecosphere for research and protection, but now, do you still want to live together with these things? Screw you. You're the one living together. Hee, don't be fooled by our old Pan's wrinkled face. He's still cuter than these things. I've recorded this. Shall we play it for Sister Pan to hear later? Meng Tu could only sigh in his heart as the 2 leading ecobiologists bickered here. Fortunately, the remote conference soon began. Basically, it was still according to the established routine. They first reported the progress of all parties, then asked questions and found solutions. Meng Tu didn't turn off the projection. He was prepared to report the latest situation to the command center later. However, the main characters now were still the 2 old professors. There were meetings every day, but the problems wouldn't be refreshed every day. Professor Wu Zhuanliang turned around and interrogated the contact person. Right now, we've set up a grassroots team here in Spring City. Don't laugh. Old Ding and I are both top-notch, and the students under us aren't idiots either. But right now, we don't even have the basic experimental conditions. Don't talk about the aberrant rebellion. I know that the wilderness laboratory here suffered heavy losses last year, but we can't just hole up in the supply base and do research, right? Do we make a round trip of nearly 1,000 kilometers every day just for the sake of parkour in the wilderness? The contact person coughed. Professor Wu, I was just about to report to you about the laboratory. We've already found a pretty good location with ready-made experimental sites and equipment. Before that, please allow me to introduce everyone to the project team's partner, Mr. Luo. At this moment, Professor Wu Zunliang noticed that there was an unfamiliar fellow who had been online the entire time but hadn't spoken. This person's face was rather thin, and the lines of muscle on his cheeks were rather heavy. He appeared rather stern and grave. Unlike the contact person who was used to speaking in a bureaucratic manner, this Mr. Luo wasn't one to beat around the bush. He went straight to the point. My company has a wilderness laboratory under its name. It was urgently closed during last year's riot and was isolated from the outside world. The damage it suffered wasn't that great. This laboratory is approximately 150 kilometers away from the target volcanic area. It's already a relatively forward position. If Professor Ding, Wu Zunliang was a bit baffled. This Mr. Luo's way of addressing him was clearly different from the way old Ding beside him addressed him. Wu Zunliang was a straightforward person, and if there was a question, he would ask, "You know me?" Mr. Luo laughed when he heard this. His originally stern face became rather warm and intimate at this moment. "Professor Wu, I'm a graduate of Acumen College 77's Biological Sciences Department. I once wanted to take the exam to become your doctoral student. I want to visit you with senior sister Qingwen and even aid at your place."
Bang.
Wu Zunliang slapped the table in realization. "I remember you. You and Qingwen were in the same orphanage. Later on, you went with her to the wilderness."
Huh?
Before he even finished speaking, the remote communication screen began to shake incessantly. The conference room was only separated by a thread, but it also began to shake violently. The teacups on the table were knocked over with tinkling sounds. Meng Tu suddenly stood up and supported two old professors at the same time. He roared through the communicator. "Report the situation. Volcanic activity has been detected. There's also an earthquake. Look over there." Professor Ding pointed at the projection that still hadn't disappeared. "The Vulcan ants' defensive line has shrunk substantially. They're all retreating." Chapter 598. A ferocious flame-bellied monitor lizard was half lying on the ground. Even so, it was still as tall as a person. Below its belly was the slowly flowing lava. Not only did the lava of nearly 1,000 degrees not destroy its limbs, but it also provided it with the energy to persist. This was a very suitable battlefield for the flame-bellied monitor lizard. As far as the eye could see, dark red lava could be seen everywhere. Some of it flowed down the hill, and some simply gushed out between the heavily cracked ground. Although it was not as powerful as an explosive eruption, the scene of the earth cracking everywhere, as if it could completely collapse at any time, was equally thrilling. In a similar environment, the flame-bellied monitor lizard had killed countless invaders, and its total size could even fill the crater behind it. Almost all of its prey could not resist the fire poison it sprayed, and it could not resist the destructive lava it controlled. But at this moment, before it could cause any fatal damage to the metal creation in front of it, its tail and one of its forelimbs had been cut off, and it had lost most of its mobility. The lava fire intertwined with the gray sky light, but it was difficult to illuminate the specially treated armor coating, as if there was always a blurry dark domain. This grayish-black metal creation was only about 20 meters away from it. In the past, it could have pounced, but now it could only desperately accumulate strength, use the special abdomen of the mutated evolution to absorb the heat of the lava, and then open its mouth wide. Buzz. The heavy alloy javelin, carrying lightning, entered the mouth of the flame-bellied monitor lizard, and a small part of it penetrated its back. It exploded like a high-explosive bomb. Magma splattered everywhere, and scales flew everywhere. Immediately, blazing electric flames shot out from the mouth, eye sockets, wounds, and even the cracks in the outer skin of the scale armor. The 2-ton body of the flame-bellied monitor lizard shrank in the blink of an eye. Its special body structure, which had evolved from the mutation, was also completely destroyed by this round of damage. The high temperature of the lava was finally revealed at this moment, and a small part of the body of the giant lizard was swallowed in a breath. However, in the burning flames of the giant lizard, there was still a blood-colored light. Electromagnetic Vanguard 1 silently stepped forward, stepping on the flat head of the flame-bellied monitor lizard, and also on the slowly flowing magma, walking to the top of the hill. The modified body based on the Sergeant X-2 model did not have the ability to resist the lava for a long time. However, when the high-temperature lava tried to devour the metal leg, it was repelled by an invisible force and slowly moved away. Number 1 crossed the line of defense of the giant fire-bellied lizards and set foot on the top of the erupting volcano. Now, the volcanic area that appeared in the optical imaging system was a real volcanic area. Within a radius of several hundred square kilometers, at least 70 to 80% of the craters were emitting thick smoke and lava. Dark red lines of fire crisscrossed the ground, cutting the area into pieces. Luo Nan had actually completed the goal of the first stage after killing the flame belly monitor lizard. Although the Guardians, who had retreated under the control of the Vulcan ants, had already gathered in the central area and rebuilt the defensive line, most of them were unable to burrow underground and bathe in the lava to enter the core area. Number 1 could do it. Under Luo Nan's control, this combat machine stepped directly into the boiling pool of lava under the protection of a powerful magnetic shield.
Of course, it was just passing by.
Soon, it locked onto a certain gap in the inner wall of the volcano. It blasted apart a chunk of rock that had just been congealed and piled up not too long ago, revealing a narrow crack illuminated by the lava. Mo Luan's civil engineering isn't bad. What should be praised was that Luo Nan was able to utilize the terrain to the greatest limit with his meticulous senses and reconnaissance over the past few days. He was able to open up a subway line to bypass the congestion on the surface. Number 1 was not the only passerby in this narrow passageway. The lava was like a flowing stream beneath its feet, extending even further into the crack. The densely packed Vulcan ants were lined up in rows within the hissing, flowing lava. They borrowed the power of the lava to move faster. Their speed was not much slower than a normal person's walking speed. The Vulcan ants did not possess complete individual thinking, but they possessed a powerful group consciousness. Luo Nan could feel the faint evil intent that came from the nothingness, but this squad of Vulcan ants was still restrained by a high degree of discipline. They ignored the damage caused by the stomp of the combat machine and continued to flow back to the core area. The formation of the ant colony had yet to end when a buzzing sound assaulted them from within the dust-filled air. It was as if a swarm of locusts had passed through. A dark red cloud of blood suddenly gushed out from the crevice to the side. There were hundreds of thousands of winged Vulcan ants. They did not have the ability to fly long distances, but they were still able to advance forward at a faster speed within this narrow passageway. This speed was just about the same as Number 1's advancing speed. Number 1 was submerged within the cloud of blood as expected. Lava and the cloud of blood extended forward within the long and narrow crevice. There was a certain section in the middle that flickered with electricity and fire irregularly. This was the phenomenon formed by the electromagnetic shield repelling and killing the surrounding Vulcan ants. The surroundings were densely packed with flying ants, and their feet were even stepping on the lava. They were just remote-controlled combat machines. They were not here in person. Otherwise, Luo Nan could not guarantee that he would be able to maintain a calm state of mind. They were both Vulcan ants. They crawled within the lava and flew within the crevice, but there was a large difference in their body shape and body structure. But this was not strange in a volcanic area. According to Luo Nan's reconnaissance over the past 2 days, there were hundreds and thousands of Vulcan ant nests within a radius of 200 kilometers. They were widely distributed, and the direction of mutation evolution was a bit different within every nest. And since the lifespan of Vulcan ants was short, they replaced each other extremely quickly. Therefore, they were able to rapidly form differences in a short amount of time. This was simply a large-scale laboratory for genetic mutation. The branches of this laboratory in the wilderness had their own areas of activity. They were very territorial, and sometimes they would even kill each other. But they all had the same origin. They all belonged to one, the mutant nest. There was a direct relationship of subordination between the headquarters and the branches. Now that headquarters was in trouble, the entire branch had returned to assist. Luo Nen only had a few short days of observation. He did not know what these Vulcan ants would do when they gathered together. But he didn't want to add more variables to his plan, so he controlled number 1 to speed up. The frequency of lightning flashing clearly increased within the blood cloud that pervaded the crevice. A series of crackling explosions rang out. Number 1's forward speed had already increased by 3 times, and the strength of the electromagnetic shield had increased correspondingly. This was to defend against the underground guardian that could come out at any time. The electromagnetic shield was an advanced technology that had yet to be realized by Earth's technology. It was formed from the integration of the seed imprint that was implanted into the combat machinery. Thus, a powerful electromagnetic field domain was formed with electromagnetic vanguard as the fulcrum. The domain pervaded the surroundings, and it could be retracted and released at will. This was the embryonic form of Enchanting's extraordinary domain. Being able to realize this kind of effect proved that the potential of the seed imprint had been excavated to a new level. And under this stimulation, the corresponding information within the divine binding hoop and the virtual brain system was activated one after another. They provided Luo Nan with even more detailed and thorough application technology. Of course, the carriers of these application technologies were all indecipherable hieroglyphs. Luo Nan relied on the even more marvelous I word to decipher a portion of the hieroglyphs with great difficulty. The divine binding hoop was the sole spoil of war from killing Enchanting. Presumably, it had caused quite a bit of trouble for its previous owner. It had to be said that Enchanting was truly a genius for being able to break into the extraordinary realm under these circumstances. High-level techniques required high-level consumption. 2,000 kilometers away in the underground laboratory of Gear, Luo Nan regulated his breathing in the simulation chamber to adapt to the ever-increasing pressure. Currently, the internal energy and transmission system of the electromagnetic Vanguard 1 had already retreated to a secondary position in the driving force. The main source of power came from the remote interference of Luo Nan's soul strength. Just the electromagnetic shield alone consumed an astronomical amount of energy. In addition, there was also the natural consumption of long-range interference. Even with Luo Nan's soul strength reserves, it was still quite strenuous. Fortunately, strands of marvelous energy seeped over from the depths of the void as Luo Nan approached the core region. The energy grew clearer and stronger. Good. Very good. Luo Nan let out a sigh of relief. This supplement was nothing compared to the overall consumption, but it was an extremely positive feedback. There was no energy in this world that was like water without a source or a tree without roots. There was bound to be a source and a process of transformation. Luo Nan was fully aware of the entire process. His heart was all the more certain and excited. Number 1's speed increased once more. Not only was it advancing towards its predetermined target, it was also tracing back to the source of the energy transformation. After advancing another 10 kilometers or so, Number 1 had already swapped out 2 passageways in the ground. One of these passageways was a shortcut that had just been created due to the earthquake. It was precisely because of this timely change that it was able to evade the even crazier attacks and interception of the Guardians. Even so, Number 1's left arm was scorched and deformed by a tyrannical mutant that could transform into lava. A large chunk of the armor on its chest was lifted off, exposing the deformed components within. As for the narrow passageway behind it, a layer of burnt ashes had already filled the entire passageway. The ashes slowly rolled along with the flowing lava. Right now, there was a vertical distance of at least 90 meters between Number 1 and the surface of the Earth. The roars of the mutants had disappeared, but the violent upheaval of the Earth brought about by the volcano and the earthquake still filled this passageway with noise. In the end, it formed muddy rumbling vibrations. Luo Nan handed over the task of analyzing the ambient sounds to the auxiliary computing system. This was to avoid the topographical changes that could cause destructive damage. As for himself, his attention was completely penetrated into the depths of the surrounding dark void. He probed the abyss region. There, a weak incantation was spiraling and circulating. It continued on without end. This was the music that surged as the energy turbulence of the abyss region passed through the special structural form. As the output gradually stabilized, the incantation grew clearer and clearer. It grew louder and louder. In the end, it was simply like a majestic and even fanatical chorus.
Blood, blood, blood. Fire, fire, fire.
Chapter 599. Number 1 took 2 more steps forward and suddenly froze. Boom! Flames smashed through the rock wall in front of him, bringing with it a destructive wave of lava heat. In the sudden change of extreme environment, Number 1's perception and computing functions were thrown into chaos for a moment. The metal body was somewhat stiff and out of control, but Luo Nan's mental senses weren't affected. Instead, they followed the fulcrum that was already stationed in this area and spread out. Then Luo Nan saw the spire-like building topple over on the other side of the collapsed rock wall. It crashed into the roaring and boiling lava, extinguishing in the blink of an eye. It wasn't strange for there to be such a building in the underground lava area. In fact, Number 1's body had adapted to the extreme environment. It braved the tide-like lava waves and walked to the edge of the collapsed rock wall. Here, the enormous cavern in front of it, as well as the twisted demonic building community within the cavern, only presented a corner of the volcano to Number 1. There were at least 10 enormous sealed structures scattered randomly in this enormous cavern with the lava as its base color. They were all made of rock and mud. They were of different sizes and were rather crude. They were connected to each other and to the rock walls of the surrounding mountain by pipes made of the same material. They crisscrossed and crisscrossed. One could see that they were building structures with clear functions at a glance. Perhaps it was the reflection of the lava's radiance, or perhaps it was the material or other factors, but these sealed structures radiated a dark red glow. They seemed to be burning at all times like enormous torches. They were very eye-catching. The dark red glow that radiated appeared to be flowing without end upon closer inspection. It was like the blood circulation system of an aberration. It didn't stop for a moment. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the temperature was like fire in this volcanic lava environment. But there were tens of millions of fire god ants in this inferno-like building community. They were following the internal and external passageways, shuttling back and forth at high speed. Luo Nan's mental senses were able to detect that the dozen or so sealed structures exposed above the lava were nearly filled to the brim with fire god ants. More and more ants were advancing, one after the other, to the far end of the rock wall. They were even advancing deeper into the depths of the lava. That's right. Similar sealed structures and passageways existed widely in other locations of the mountain and the Earth's crust, beneath the unfathomable depths of the high-temperature lava. They were the ant rooms and ant tunnels built by this enormous colony of fire god ants. All of these structures together formed the entirety of the aberration nest. And this was only the lower part of the aberration nest. According to Luo Nan's probing observations over the past few days, this aberration nest included at least 200 ant rooms and 10 times the number of ant tunnels. There was no obvious pattern to their distribution. Some places were denser, while others were thinner. Overall, they still formed the shape of an inverted pyramid. About a fifth of the lower portion was completely submerged in magma. And that was Luo Nan's final destination, the heart of the entire aberration nest, the queen of the fire god ants. It was also the core of the collective consciousness of the entire fire god ant society. The tremors of the mountain and the ground continued. Number 1 stood at the edge of the cliff for 3 to 5 seconds before another ant chamber was peeled off from the cliff. Together with tens of thousands of fire god ants, it fell heavily into the lava. Most ant chambers were connected to the surrounding mountains and strata. The volcanic activity in this area had probably been too intense, resulting in the collapse of the strata that supported it, exposing the ant chambers inside. From this, it could be seen that the ant chambers of the fire god ants were much sturdier than the surrounding rock strata. But these peculiar creations had lost their supporting foundation, and it was very difficult for them to maintain themselves in this vile environment for long periods of time. Such destructive tremors had the effects of natural disasters like volcanoes and earthquakes. There was also the forceful interference of the energy turbulence in the abyss region on the material plane, adding fuel to the flames. There was also the more direct impact from the depths of the lava. Right now, the lava below was surging with waves. There was no pattern to them at all. It was as if a dozen enormous monsters were fighting and struggling within. So much so that the rock walls below continued to crumble and fall, chiseling larger and larger holes. Under these circumstances, it was very difficult for Number One's auxiliary computing system to accurately monitor and judge the surrounding environment. It was as good as crippled. If it's crippled, then it's crippled. Number One had already completed its basic mission by being able to advance to this area. Luo Nan couldn't count on it to play any role in the future. Luo Nan soon made a decision. He controlled Number One to slide down along the rock wall. He used the most direct method to approach the critical area. The crumbling strata presented a very bad concave shape. There were practically no places for Luo Nan to borrow strength from. And in this extreme environment, Number One's not-so-passable basic design exposed problems. Its external rocket propulsion system was intermittent. It simply relied on the electromagnetic shield to roll down like a rubber ball. As for braking and so on, Luo Nan had to rely on the help of the alloy combat knife. Such a sorry state completely obliterated the valiant appearance of No. One from its sharp knife charge in the previous few hours. Luo Nan couldn't care less. He controlled Number One to slide down another 40 meters or so. The surrounding air was becoming even more viscous. Enormous noises. Noises that originated from the two directions of the material plane and the abyss region's void had already blasted and kneaded together. They radiated a tyrannical psychic pressure that was distorted and chaotic. An invisible whirlpool of turbulence swept up within the Inferno prison. Right now, Luo Nan could clearly feel the collision and conflict of the two forces within. On one side was the great chorus of blood, 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 fire, fire, fire. It appeared to be fanatical, but in fact, it occupied the dominant position within the abyss region's void. Its energy circulation was extremely strange and miraculous. On the other side was the enormous heat source entrenched in the volcanic strata here. It was in a relatively rough and wild mode of operation, charging back and forth. Although a huge amount of energy was wasted at every moment, in this environment, it was almost as if it was replenished at any time, inexhaustible and inexhaustible. Mo did well. The fire god ants. They really did make the right choice. The conductor of the great chorus was undoubtedly Mo. This puppet that resided within the Blood Soul Temple only had that tyrannical combat instinct left. Even now, he was still able to bring out such a remarkable method of circulation. Even with the powerful enhancement of the Blood Soul Temple, he was worthy of being an expert that was only a step away from transcendence. As for the leading force of the enormous heat source, it was naturally the fire god ant colony. The fire god ant colony's consciousness was quite disciplined. Combined with the enormous ant nest structure that covered the volcanic region, they formed a complete energy circulation and utilization system within an area of nearly 1,000 square kilometers. Even though there were various inefficiencies within, and they were unavoidably restricted by the natural environment, they still possessed inconceivable power due to their enormous base. If they were to contend against the fire god ant head-on, all of the transcendence on Earth, be it physical or mental, would be crushed by the fire god ant. Then there would be nothing for Luo Nan to do, and there would be no plans. All he had to do was pat his ass and get the hell out of here. But today's facts proved that even if one had an overwhelming advantage in strength, one might not necessarily be able to gain the upper hand without the corresponding high-end circulation technique. One might even be able to be used by others. Otherwise, where would the energy Luo Nan was using to replenish himself come from? Right now, Emoluin seemed to be piloting a floating power generation platform. He was drifting on the vast ocean. The enormous waves that reached the heavens didn't topple this platform. Instead, they provided powerful tidal energy, helping the platform complete a series of energy transformations. Right now, this transformation mode was still a rootless duckweed, but Luo Nan believed that it wouldn't be long before there would be a huge change. The progress of the forced infusion transformation is okay. It's just that I'm a bit uncertain when I put the seed in. It really won't do. I'll ask Rue when to help. Has she finished her class yet? While Luo Nan was distracted, a heat wave of lava that was several dozen meters tall suddenly surged within the enormous void. It nearly filled the entire void in an instant, swallowing number 1 whole. The electromagnetic shield was raised to the highest level in an instant. This was the instantaneous limit of Luo Nan's soul strength when it came to interfering with the material plane. Even the depths of the layers of dark red lava had blue-white lightning tenaciously leaping about. It held on for at least 2 seconds, but in the end, it was scattered and shattered. Luo Nan knew that the instantaneous influx of energy had caused quite a bit of damage to the combat machine. But this was already meaningless. This was because the surging wave of lava had smashed the combat machine into pieces. The faint sounds of the body fragments exploding were drowned out by the enormous background noise of the void. There was no value in saving it. Such a tyrannical attack was the result of the seething evil thoughts of the fire god ant colony. But this wasn't necessarily directed at number 1. According to Emoluin's feedback, this was more like a venting action of the colony after repeated failed attacks. Luo Nan could see that more than half of the dozen ant chambers within the enormous void had collapsed due to the attack just now. This part of the blood circulation system, which could be considered complete, had a large area of necrosis in the blink of an eye, harming others and harming oneself. It was nothing more than this. TSK. How violent. Luckily, I specially chose a high melting point tantalum alloy. I also did some heat insulation. Number 1's head module was still considered complete, as well as half of its chest and shoulder armor. This was the largest wreckage that Luo Nan's electromagnetic shield could protect. Its body functions had already been completely lost. Its only function now was to protect the metal core in the high-temperature lava so that it wouldn't be quickly destroyed. Currently, the wreckage of number 1's body had completely lost its ability to move. It was slowly sinking in the lava. In the extreme environment of the lava, the interaction between mind and matter was severely limited. Forcefully obtaining a driving force was not desirable, and this was not a good opportunity. So it could only be a mechanical beauty that quietly watched from the sidelines for now. Chapter 600. Wreckage number 1 continued to sink closer and closer to the heart, at the bottom of the lava. It was also the lowest level of the Vulcan ant nest, the area where the ant queen resided. Perhaps it was a coincidence, but the core area of the Vulcan ant nest really did look like an enormous heart. Most of its structure was embedded into the ground. It was completely exposed to the lava and was approximately 20 meters tall. It was undulating due to the intense activity of the ground. It really was like the swelling and contracting of a living heart. Moreover, there were 6 thick pipes connected to the top. Dark red blood was constantly pouring in and circulating. Although the color of this blood was similar to the lava, it was not to the extent of being confused. This was because the luster of the active flow was hard to be completely concealed even by the layers of lava. Luo Nan was still thinking about the lava attack that had smashed wreckage number 1 into pieces. The mental sensor network that pervaded the lava focused slightly under his command. It swept from the heart to the inside and outside of the continuously sinking ant room structure. Liquid lava can achieve hammering. This shows that it has a set of controls. But it doesn't seem like it can already carry out consciousness interference with the surrounding environment. There should be a medium. Not only can the Vulcan ant control a living body, it can even control lava. The operating mechanism here seems a bit familiar. Such a marvelous operating mode clearly did not appear in normal data. Luo Nan soon had an idea. It's in the user's manual. It seems to have been mentioned in the material chapter.
Huh.
The underground lava trembled once more. At first, Luo Nan believed that this was another vent of the Vulcan Ant's collective consciousness. But he soon confirmed that this unforeseen event was not led by the Vulcan Ant's consciousness, but it was inextricably linked to it. Within the twisting vortex of the void of the abyss region and the inferno of lava, a structure of special significance was soaked in the residual energy that overflowed from both sides. It silently molded and grew. It had already taken shape. It broke through the already somewhat weak ground layer with a single tremor. It stuck close to the heart of the Vulcan ant nest, withstood the boiling lava, and rose up. It was a thick and short stone pillar. Even if it stuck its head out, it would only be a meter tall in the end. It was practically insignificant next to the enormous Vulcan ant nest that occupied the entire mountain and several hundred meters of the ground layer. It was like a speck on a person's body. It could be ignored in a matter of seconds. But just as the stone pillar was pulled out, the turbulent vortex that was twisting in the void, causing it to coil and accumulate sediment, suddenly came to a stop. Luo Nan had yet to come to a conclusion as to what sort of stimulative changes occurred to the collective consciousness of the fire god ants in this instant. But from Luo Nan's perspective, Luo Nan felt that Imo Luan was at the helm. The floating power-generating platform drifted up and down within the enormous waves that reached the heavens. Suddenly, an enormous anchor was fiercely stabbed into it. The end of the anchor hit the bottom of the ocean. Although it was shaking violently and even bringing an even more intense blast to the floating platform, it was still deeply embedded into the soil and anchored to the hard seabed. This was not all. At this moment on the platform, another heavy and sturdy pile fell, directly wedged into the depths of the turbulent vortex. 1 pile, 2 piles, 3 piles, 4 piles at the heart of the Vulcan ant nest, the thick and short stone pillars were pulled up one by one, just like the piles that had fallen. Some of the piles had just probed down when they were wrapped in lava by the berserk consciousness of the fire god ants, smashing them to pieces. But there were also some piles that were either deep or shallow, fixed in place. Then they were pulled up, smashed, wedged in, and smashed again. It was hard to say which one was more tenacious like this over and over again. But in any case, the floating platform never broke away from the storm vortex. Instead, it was fixed within this domain, forming a deadlock. This was also the most terrifying phase of energy consumption. No matter how marvelous Mo Luan's combat consciousness was, he was just a B-rank puppet. There was a limit to his own energy reserves. It was impossible for him to directly contend against the fire god ants, who occupied the terrain advantage. Therefore, he could only rely on his master, Luo Nan's closed system. This was, without a doubt, a collision between the two systems. After the first wave, Luo Nan was already very strained. In a certain sense, Luo Nan's soul strength reserves were already the best in the world. This was not only because of the enormous output of his closed system's large production line. It was also because he could ignore the carrying capacity of his fleshly body. He could use the form of the soul cloak to extend and store energy nearly limitlessly. Luo Nan's current soul cloak could cover the entire world. In addition to the combined reserves of the boundless cloud world, Luo Nan's stamina was so long that he could practically suppress all the cultivators of the world. Perhaps only the leaders of the 3 great secret orders could rely on their enormous numbers of believers to contend against him. The only thing that could limit Luo Nan was the carrying capacity of his fleshly body. Though he possessed the boundless ocean, his body's capacity was limited in the end. Even if he were to be sucked dry in an instant, it would be nothing more than the storage capacity of a lake. Not to mention the vibrations and impacts of doing so, just the transformation within was destined to lead to one fault after another. This was extremely dangerous in the tight deadlock process. If the opponent was a genuine extraordinary, Luo Nan's life would be pretty much handed over when the first fault appeared. The collective consciousness of the Vulcan ant was not this sharp. It was unable to sense Luo Nan's flaws. But even so, Luo Nan, who was in the simulator, was like a twisted towel under the frantic and irascible impact of the wrestling. The muscles, tendons, bones, and flesh of his entire body seemed to be about to be squeezed out of it. If this situation were to continue, Luo Nan would have done his utmost to dig a peerless sinkhole for himself. He could absolutely contend for the top 3 spot on the list of the stupidest people in the 50 years of history of the inner world. Fortunately, this enemy of his did not develop to a qualified and perfect degree, even though it had gathered millions of individuals into a group consciousness. Not only did it not discover the problem that Luo Nan exposed, it even poked an even bigger hole. The group consciousness of the Vulcan ant did not know how to properly utilize its own strength. It also did not understand that this kind of strength would inevitably harm others and itself once it exceeded a certain limit. If it were Luo Nan, he would absolutely not forcefully break through this limit when the instantaneous consumption of soul strength exceeded the limits of what his body could bear under normal circumstances. He would exchange endless future troubles for temporary pleasure. The Vulcan ant did not have this kind of awareness. In its simple mind, using its innate talent to drive the enemy was obviously the most important option. But at this stage, when faced with Mo Luan, who was like a mist of nothingness, and Number 1, who had already turned into a pile of mechanical wreckage, the so-called drive ability was of no use. So it could only settle for the next best thing. It used its incomplete side ability to knock down the enemy. It must be said that the upper limit of the Vulcan ant's side ability was extremely high in the environment of the volcanic region. There would practically never be a situation where it was lacking in strength. Under these circumstances, its train of thought was even simpler. If it did not knock down the enemy, then it would need to increase its strength once more until the enemy was smashed into smithereens. With the foundation of reality, this kind of train of thought could not be wrong. But it did not consider one thing. Who would be the first to be destroyed in such a big fight in its own nest? In any case, it won't be me. Luo Nan grimaced in pain. He used the Daoyin technique given to him by the gym bishop to relax his muscles and bones, to reduce the damage. At the same time, he was able to capture the turning point of this confrontation within this stalemate. He did not need to wait for the Vulcan ant to smash his nest into smithereens. He only needed to keep an eye on this one-track-minded group consciousness. The instant the two instincts of killing the enemy and self-preservation intersected, creating an even deeper level of chaos. The turning point arrived much faster than Luo Nan imagined. But it happened after all the ant chambers in the enormous cavity above the lava had completely collapsed. The Vulcan ants that fell into the lava were not immediately finished. But every ant chamber and every connecting pipe was the foundation of the Vulcan ant colony. They were an important construction foundation and source of energy for the group consciousness. When large areas of necrosis appeared endlessly and continued to spread, a blockage appeared in the originally complete energy cycle. In the end, hesitation and chaos appeared in this single strand of group consciousness. It was at this moment that the true great enemy, who had crossed realms and hidden here from another time and space, revealed its fangs to the Vulcan ant colony. The instant of hesitation and chaos expanded into a destructive storm in the blink of an eye. The Wraith sign exploded from above the polar domain like a bomb filled with poison. It smashed into the structure of the group consciousness that the Vulcan ant colony had formed with great difficulty. Luo Nan knew better than the vast majority of people in this world just how strict the requirements of a structure were for a group consciousness that had a clear direction. The group consciousness of the Vulcan ant society was able to become neutral from the chaotic and illusory mental turbid flow with great difficulty. A small portion of it probed into the abyssal region and was able to integrate its power from a higher level. But because of the Wraith sign's deadly bombardment, the structure collapsed and the foundation was corroded. This caused the edifice of group consciousness, which originally possessed a certain order, to collapse and fall apart in an instant. It must be said that as long as there was a nest and a strict social structure of the Vulcan ant, it was not difficult to reconstruct the group consciousness. Since the beginning of time, The Vulcan ant colony in the volcanic area had been penetrated 5 times by powerful people from all walks of life. Each time, it was a great crisis that nearly overturned the entire colony. Even the queen ant was captured. The most recent time was 6 or 7 years ago, and this didn't include the aftermath of the world-shaking battle with priceless gold. But within these short few years, the Vulcan ant colony had developed to its current scale. They were still the number 1 or 2 hegemons of this volcanic area. The tenacity of the Vulcan ant colony was worthy of admiration. But the problem was that the Wraith sign was the poison bomb that had instantly destroyed the core structure of the Vulcan ant society. This dark-sided species was currently using its inconceivable talent to pour its toxic spores into the ruins of the core structure. The spores began to proliferate rapidly. The Vulcan ant began by controlling other living creatures. And this time, they had encountered a true expert in this field. Chapter 601. The opportunity came earlier than expected. After the Wraith sign blew up the structure of the group consciousness of the Vulcan ants, it naturally activated the corresponding mechanisms to stop damage and repair. As mentioned before, as long as the Vulcan ant aberration nest was present, the material foundation and structure were present, it was not difficult to reconstruct the group consciousness. The Vulcan ant society had used 5 or 6 successful examples to prove this point. According to the relevant information from research on the Vulcan ants, when the Vulcan ant society suffered a fatal attack, usually when the queen was killed or captured, or when the aberration nest was severely damaged, causing the group consciousness to collapse and the ants to be leaderless, this highly social aberration colony would activate its extreme survival mode. They would use the relatively intact area as an axis on the wreckage of the nest to combine the ant chambers and ant tunnels that could be linked together. They would radiate the relevant pheromones to gather the greatest number of defeated soldiers. After gathering to a certain scale, they would use a special aberration path to stimulate and nurture a temporary queen ant. They would reconstruct the group consciousness in a short amount of time. With this as the foundation, they would rapidly replace each other and regroup. If there was no area of this scale, a single ant chamber could complete this task. It was just that the group consciousness produced would be of an extremely low level. The various ant chambers would gradually integrate and slowly converge. However, this would be accompanied by conflict and slaughter. It would inevitably end with the death of the temporary queen ant of the losing side. The process would be extremely tragic. It was this extreme survival mode and its matching ability to rapidly replace each other that helped the Vulcan ant society to tenaciously survive in this volcanic region for several decades. But it was also because such a pattern had appeared too early in today's special circumstances. The Wraith sign's poison bomb struck from above, crushing the group consciousness of the Vulcan ant society from the mental plane. This attack didn't cause much damage to the Vulcan ant nest, but it sent the hypertoxic spores into every corner of the Vulcan ant society. Luo Nen still did not understand the Wraith sign's keen and brutal instincts. He did not know how it was constructed. But every time this fellow hunted, it would accurately tear apart the vital parts of the target. This time was no exception. The hypertoxic spores did not possess any direct destructive power, but when they spread out, the fire god ants that were moving through the various ant rooms and ant tunnels suddenly fell into chaos in their neat and orderly formation. It was as if they had lost their sense of direction. The front and back of the formation were disjointed. Some of them accelerated forward while others turned back. Some of them even clashed together, interfering with each other as they circled in confusion. Interference pheromone. Luo Nen roughly guessed an answer. Ants and the like were social insects. Their behavior patterns were largely guided by pheromones. Though the Vulcan ant was a mutant species, it still retained a few similar patterns. Due to the Vulcan ants receiving erratic information, the large circulation system with the heart of the nest as the center was already in disorder. However, upon closer inspection, there were some general patterns that could be followed. Millions and tens of millions of fire god ants were clearly gathering towards the nearest ant room. Every antchamber was a center, and there were no exceptions. Thus, in a short span of a dozen seconds, the aberrated nest had hundreds and thousands of centers. They had even begun to cut off the circulation channels and retract the flowing energy, entering a de facto state of separation. This is really hee-hee. For the fire god ants that had been torn apart, no, they had not done anything wrong. The instincts engraved in their genes were displaying their effects. After the leading group consciousness collapsed, they quickly entered an extreme survival mode. The environment they felt and the stimuli they received indicated that the overall structure of the aberrated nest no longer existed. They had to use the remaining antchambers as the center to gather the greatest amount of power and reconstruct the group consciousness. Then they would be constantly replaced and walk the path of expansion once more. So they did this, and they did it quite well. The crisis pheromone formed after the ant assembly was violently volatile. It was injected into the antchambers through a special method, erasing the suppressive pheromone from when the Vulcan ant queen was alive. This caused a portion of the worker ants inside to undergo aberrations. At the same time, they killed each other. The final victor became the temporary queen ant. They erected a rough new framework and began to construct a low-level group consciousness. During this period of time, the Vulcan ant nest had the beauty of a single spark setting a prairie ablaze. Within Luo Nan's mental sensing network, there were weak soul flames lighting up one after another. From a few to a few dozen to over 100. They quickly formed a scale. The amount of resources that the Vulcan ants could utilize in the environment of the volcanic area should not be doubted. Although these low-level group consciousnesses were far from being as powerful as the previous one, the imprint engraved in their genes still gave them the natural ability to absorb external heat and life energy. According to normal survival mode, these low-level group consciousnesses would have a period of solitude to further familiarize themselves with and apply this ability. When they began to expand once more, they should be experts in this field. They would capture thousands upon thousands of living creatures of other races during the expansion process. They would serve as food and slaves. Then they would rely on the advantage of expansion to defeat their own species that no longer belonged to the same aberrated evolutionary path. They would unify the volcanic area once more and let their genes follow an even stronger path of development and inheritance. But there was a problem. At this stage, every antchamber was very close to each other. They were close to each other to the point where they would be face to face the moment they stepped out of the door. According to the genetic instincts of the Vulcan ants, they did not have any kinship or brotherly respect when faced with this kind of situation. The only choice was fight. The internal war of the Vulcan ants erupted 15 seconds after the formation of the first low-level group consciousnesses. They entered into an all-out war mode 5 minutes later. For a time, the entire core area of the Vulcan ant nest was filled with the flames of war. And the effects of the collapse of the original group consciousnesses were still continuing to spread. If there was a problem at the headquarters, then the branch divisions would not have an easy time. It was unknown when the unrest in the entire volcanic area would come to an end. Speaking of which, the entire Vulcan ant society had suddenly entered the spring and autumn warring states period mode. It wasn't that no one wanted to do their best to save it. Originally, the only core of the aberrated nest was located in the heart beneath the lava. The highest ruler of the entire Vulcan ant society, or perhaps a queen, had to be added. Well, in short, the true Vulcan ant queen was extremely angry and irritable at this moment. The Vulcan ant queen was probably a mutant among mutants. It had an extremely deformed body. The front half of its body was only 4 or 5 centimeters long. It was around 5 times the size of a normal Vulcan ant. But below its abdomen, it was rapidly expanding in an unimaginable manner. Its diameter alone was 10 centimeters, about the width of an adult's clenched fist. As for its length, it was about the length of an entire arm behind it. This structure was a little similar to the termite queen. Many researchers suspected that the original species, before the mutation, was a termite. But no termite queen would have this kind of mass and strength. The completely unbalanced body proportions made it look more like a super large eggplant with a handle. At this moment, this eggplant was squirming slightly. A dirty light like pus and blood filled the entire space of the heart. It reflected the countless fertilized eggs and non-fertilized eggs piled neatly on the four walls, as well as the rather neat ranks of worker ants and soldier ants. Even further out, there were layers of blood-red fluff spread out, like layers upon layers of terraced crops, neatly arranged. It became an inseparable part of the internal structure of the heart. At this moment, the Vulcan Ant Queen had just recovered from the shock of losing control of her kingdom. In the entire Vulcan Ant Society, the Vulcan Ant Queen was definitely the one closest to possessing a complete individual consciousness. In fact, it was the core of the Vulcan Ant's collective consciousness. This was its most important function in this colony other than reproduction. It could be said that the collective consciousness of the entire Vulcan Ant Society was determined by the mutation talent and growth of the queen. This queen was still very young. It had only been about 2 years since she became the ruler of this kingdom. This caused it to be far from developing a mature consciousness system, making it even harder for it to make accurate and clear judgments. This limitation caused the collapse of the collective consciousness of the Vulcan Ant when the two systems collided. It also caused it to be unable to analyze the crux of the problem after losing control of the kingdom. Instead, it was quickly driven by an even more stubborn instinct. The great enemy that descended from the sky was thrown to the back of its mind. What it needed to do now was to consolidate its resources and strength, using a more advantageous structure among a bunch of low-level consciousnesses to reclaim its kingdom and become the ruler of this world once again. In the spring and autumn warring states period, it undoubtedly had an overwhelming advantage. But the current scenario was alien invasion. The former queen and the future overlord were not given any chances. A bloody beam of light tore through the barrier between the mental and material planes, directly piercing into the heart region. This was an artillery attack from the direction of the polar domain. Ever since Luo Nen was tossed around by the dimensional crossbow, he had taken a liking to this sort of tyrannical and fierce offensive method that came from the polar domain. Right now, he no longer had the tyrannical collective consciousness of the Vulcan ants. There was Mo Luen in the void of the abyssal region. There was the seed imprint in the depths of the lava. The Wraith sign itself had long since transcended space and boundaries. All kinds of interference had disappeared, and there were 2 positions of reference at the same time. There was absolutely no reason for the attack to miss the mark. The bloody beam of light silently drowned the area where the Vulcan Ant Queen was. A similar hue flooded the entire ant room. At this moment, inside the heart, countless zygotes and unzygotes, the dense troop of soldier ants and the eggplant queen, which was supposed to be the toughest, were all twisted and destroyed in the intense ripples of light. Chapter 602. In this era, the night in any city was no different. The only thing that could be distinguished was the food habits accumulated over a long period of time. After moving from Xia City to Tea City for 2 months, Inla still hadn't gotten used to the completely different tastes. She returned to Xia City this time. The food she had grown accustomed to in her early years gave her a unique feeling when it collided with her taste buds. But tonight, Inla didn't eat. This was a habit she had developed with Mrs. Halder. Lady Halder had maintained this habit for more than 10 years. The last time she had a meal was before she had beheaded her husband. But Frau Halder did not mind a glass of red wine before bed. Thus, Inla pushed the dining cart and knocked on Mrs. Halder's door. Mrs. Halder had just finished her bath and was sitting on a round armchair by the window. Her bathrobe covered her pale skin, revealing only her calves and bare feet. The most conspicuous thing was that on her right cheek there was a long and slender bloodstain that had a strange curvature. At this moment, it was emitting a dark red light. This was not a description. This bloodstain was proof that she had passed the ultimate test of the blood flame will. In itself, it had a rather mystical effect. Boss. Inla used the old way of addressing Mrs. Halder. Then, just like when she was a secretary back then, she poured the red wine into a glass and let Mrs. Halder take it. Lady Halder picked up the thin stem of the glass and raised it to her eyes, staring at the red wine swirling within. At this moment, Lady Halder was like a melancholy and lonely lady, although her heart was surging with iron and fire. Enla sat to the side, wondering if she should start a conversation. At this moment, Lady Halder took the initiative to speak, her voice low. Our investor refused to meet. Enla didn't find it strange at all. She had guessed it when she left Xia City last time. However, she had always been curious as to who the investor that Lady Halder had mentioned was. This wasn't some inconceivable person who had taught Madame Halder the secret art of hurting the dark side of species in order to reconstruct the sacrificial artifact. In the entirety of Xia City, there were only a handful of people who had the qualifications to do this. Even if it wasn't limited to Xia City, how many more people could there be? Lady Halder swirled the wine, her eyes unfocused. Is it to prevent losses, or are they happy to see it happen? That is the question. Right now, Madame Halder seemed to be in low spirits. The more it was like this, the harder it was for Enla to speak. She stared at the cup in her hand in a daze. Fortunately, this atmosphere didn't last for too long. Very quickly, Lady Halder's voice regained its usual calmness and decisiveness. The investment is only an external force. The wavering of the church's foundation is what's fatal. You are now the only deputy officiator, so you must focus your efforts on the ritual. Although Ren Hong is a rebel, he is better at this than you are. Even Ren Hong, that dead man, was compared. Enla naturally understood their attitude and replied solemnly, I will remember. Lady Halder cut to the chase. What about the target? The target has entered the Abyss area again, but there won't be any offensive and defensive drills tonight or for the next 2 or 3 days. I heard that Teacher Luo is in seclusion. Luo Nand isn't here. He's basically just looking at the scenery in the abyssal region. But who can say that in a few months, a few weeks, or even a few days, there won't be new functions? Indeed. Enlo added before she hesitated briefly before she asked, Boss, the blood will ring, and us, I mean. Enla didn't continue. Lady Halder looked at her former secretary through her wine glass. The sparkling and translucent walls of the glass caused the two's faces to clearly distort. As the glass spun, it transformed into all sorts of strange shapes. Communication between people was often like this. It was precisely because they knew that people were all the more cautious. Lady Halder understood Ian Lee's thoughts. She also understood her apprehensions. At this time, it was the superior who spoke the truth. This represented honesty and trust, so she hooked the corner of her lips. You want to ask if the structure of the blood will ring and the fundamental ritual of the order, the Blood Soul Temple, belong to the same category?
I.e.
Let's put it this way. The word configuration that Luo Nan spoke of can be used to generalize the blood will ring and the Blood Soul Temple. From an academic perspective, they should both belong to the same class of configuration. Ian Lo let out a secret sigh of relief and hurriedly responded, That's why we monitor the corresponding target for reference. Lady Halder interrupted her words, but before the 14th, I once believed that the solidification of configurations in the abyssal region belonged only to extraordinaries and the Order. Ian Lee's expression darkened slightly. Before the 14th, there weren't many ability users in this world who could enter the attack and defense of the abyssal region, but there were still quite a few. Mental side users of B rank and above had several years of research, and they should have no problem doing so. However, the average B rank mental side user would only be able to stay in the abyssal region for a few seconds to a few minutes before they would be struck down by the turbulent flow of energy. There were a few who were more powerful, and they could temporarily forge special structures to turn resistance into power. They could seize a short opportunity to attack and kill. Only those who reached the level of extraordinaries, especially the mental side extraordinaries, could solidify this structure, the configuration that Luo Nan spoke of, within the energy flow of the abyssal region. It was like a car or a boat, like a house or a city. It could truly utilize and control the inexhaustible energy of the abyssal region. It could be adjusted and modified a step further, gradually increasing its power. Aside from extraordinaries, the only ones who could accomplish this before the 14th were the various orders, the ones who could transform the hearts of the people into their own. Actually, not everyone in the various secret orders had this ability. They had to have extraordinaries overseeing the abyssal region in the early years. They were able to solidify the configuration of the abyssal region, then transform it into a foundation. They were able to link their believers' desires, beliefs, and so on. Then, they used this to divide the level of authority, allowing one person's technique to be used by 100, 1,000, or even 10,000 people. The origins and details of these techniques were the secrets of the various orders. Every orders had their own specialties and taboos, and they were hidden behind a dense fog of mystery. Only someone like Enlo, who was a core member of the upper echelons of the orders, who was part of the orders of ideals like the Blood Flame Order, was able to understand, learn, and understand its essence. Enlo originally believed that this would be the core secret and reliance that she would guard within her heart. But she never expected that the Blood Intent Ring would appear out of nowhere and bump into this highest domain. It even brought several hundred people to tour around. Up until now, no one had connected this matter with the fundamental rules of the various orders. But how long could this last? Both inside and outside were in turmoil. What could she do? Mrs. Halder saw through Lee's thoughts. She lowered her head slightly, indicating for Le to come over. Le was a bit startled, but she still got up and walked over to her former boss's side. At this distance, in this atmosphere, she subconsciously did what she did in the past. She curled up her body and bent her legs. She sat on the carpet and leaned against Mrs. Halder's knee. She was like an admiring child, but she was even more like an obedient kitten. Her choice was very correct. Chapter 603. Ever since she had become the vice officiant, Enlo had entered the Abyss region more than once, entering the Blood Soul Temple, towering amidst the chaotic turbulence. Every time, she felt as if she was riding a small boat out to sea, boarding a platform amidst a violent storm. The stability of the platform was naturally much greater than that of a small boat, giving her a great sense of security. However, the impact of the storm and turbulence was always present. Enlo felt that the Blood Soul Temple was a platform on the sea, but she had no idea what it looked like in the eyes of others. That was because in the order system, the Blood Soul Temple had countless sides. In the eyes of every believer, there were subtle similarities and differences, but they could never see the whole picture. As a priest, how could she not be the same? As the vice officiant, Enlo could understand the basic framework of the Blood Soul Temple and control a portion of the details. She used a secret technique to purify the believer's will, using it as a primer to mobilize the power of the Abyss region. This allowed her, with her C+ rank strength, to compete with B rank experts. The position of vice officiant had raised Lee's level, but she had always felt that this wasn't a good job. This was especially true after Renhong's rebellion. After she had taken over the Order's daily operations, she had to sort out and guide the willpower of thousands of believers every day for the past 2 months. Furthermore, due to the instability of the believer base during this period of time, there were all sorts of troubles and slip-ups. Even with Lady Halder taking care of it, it still took up most of her energy. Sometimes Enlu even thought, Renhong's rebellion. Could it be that he's tired of this matter? Lady Halder seemed to have the ability to see through people's minds. She communicated with her thoughts. Mastering the sacrificial method and managing the Blood Soul Temple have always been the most difficult tasks. You have foresight and decisiveness, and you also have the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. However, you lack the tenacity to put in the effort. These things aren't the most suitable for you. Enlo hurriedly expressed, I will definitely focus on my thoughts. Lady Halder disagreed. Such a personality isn't something that can be easily fixed. Not to mention you, even I have had a hard time sorting through these past few years. Constantly immersed in this chaotic power of faith, it will only be more difficult to maintain one's own thoughts. Enlo once again thought of Renhong. Madame Halder's thoughts seeped in like icy water, layer by layer. In the end, It's because of the lack of sacrificial artifacts. The sacrificial vessel can be manipulated, suppressed, and adjusted. At the same time, it is also a set of rules. Our various operations can be used as a reference to see if they are in line with the fundamental laws. I just don't know if we have led the church on the right path in the past few years. Boss. Madame Halder's thoughts continued unabated. Without the sacrificial artifact, we can only wait until every year's grand ceremony. But this year, Enla finally understood why Mrs. Halder's mood was so low. Because today, December 21st, was the day of the Bloodflame Order's establishment memorial ceremony. This time of the year was the busiest and most important time for the church. But this year, today and tonight were undoubtedly the most chaotic and desolate. Since the officiator and deputy officiator were not present, Zhang Yuanjin could only take over the ceremony in D City. As for the ceremony in Xia City, they had spent half a year preparing for it, so they simply threw it aside. Enlo once believed that Madame Halder would return to Xia City at this time to give an explanation to the believers of Xia City. She never imagined that she would die without a cause. She stayed within the Blood Soul Temple in the Abyss District. She could feel the will of the believers wither and waver. Enlo wasn't even willing to understand it any further. She just wanted to clean up the mess tomorrow morning. Madame Halder clearly had a different way of thinking from Enlo. She sent a strand of her thoughts straight to the lowest level, where the withering and wavering was the most intense. Enlo was helpless. She could only follow. Soon, she arrived at the structure of the Blood Soul Temple, where the stone forest and magma lake were. Originally, this was the structural region where the believers' will was cleansed and purified. The powerful structure of the Blood Soul Temple condensed a powerful internal pressure to form a lake of magma. The muddy willpower of the believers continued to be tempered until it reached a certain degree. Only then could they go to a higher level. But now the internal force was loose. There was no heat. There was only restlessness and chaos. It was like a mosquito flying in disorder. The willpower of some devout believers even fell down. They were affected and gradually showed signs of stripping away. Faced with such a situation, Enla felt that idling around was a sin. She subconsciously took action to control it. Fortunately, the basic structure of the Blood Soul Temple was still stable. The first Oblatum had indeed left behind a stable foundation for the order. Madame Halder didn't move. She only watched Enlo and asked, "Are we at the edge of the abyss now?" "No, boss, no." Enlo might lack the willpower to do her best, but her foresight and judgment had always been praised. She didn't think that there was a problem with Madame Halder's will. She only saw the current situation as a test. As she dealt with the loss of the believer's faith, she solemnly replied, "It's just as you said." At the bottom of the abyss of fear and despair, the mighty blood flame, Will, is watching us. The blood flame order's teachings had always been extremely violent. On one hand, it made it very difficult for them to expand. On the other hand, it made it have a relatively solid core of believers. Moreover, the more adversity they faced, the more they were able to display their resolute nature of the teachings. Last time, when the blood flame order was on the verge of collapse, it was precisely this extremely resolute nature that gave birth to Madame Halder. She used her husband's head to prolong the order's life and rebirth. Now, perhaps it was her turn. Bang, bang, bang. A strange sound suddenly came from a certain part of the bottom structure. Ian Lee's heart skipped a beat. Her smooth control suddenly became sluggish. She didn't even have time to search for the source of the problem before the continuous bang, bang sound spread throughout the stone forest and magma lake area. In response to it, the turbulent storm outside suddenly became intense. The Blood Soul Temple, the platform on the sea, began to sway, causing one's mind to be in chaos. At this moment, the destructive storm of the abyss seemed like it could cut through at any time. In Ainley's perception, the basic framework of the Blood Soul Temple was clearly distorted. It was on the verge of collapsing and breaking. Ainley didn't know what to do, and Madame Halder didn't give her any instructions. Just like that, her consciousness stiffened as she spent a nightmarish period of time in the bang, bang, bang sound. When she came back to her senses, her consciousness had already returned to the plane of reality. It was most likely that Madame Halder had brought her back. The light in the room was warm and gentle, but Ainley's heart was filled with coldness. Her memories of the abyss were somewhat hazy, but she still remembered that the structure of the Blood Soul Temple had already undergone some kind of irreversible change after the continuous distortion. Ainley turned her head, wanting to ask what had just happened. When she turned her head, her cheek rubbed against Madame Halder's body. Because she was kneeling, she rubbed against a leg that was exposed outside the bathrobe. It was slender and tight, but it was so cold that it didn't have the warmth of a living person. Halder didn't seem to feel anything. He just expressionlessly raised his glass and drank the red wine. But Ainley clearly sensed a faint layer of blood mixed in the wine's fragrance. Boss. Ainley was bewildered. She wanted to get up, but her head hurt slightly as Halder pressed down on it. Madame Halder looked down from above, her gaze cold and heavy. When she looked into Ainley's eyes, it was like an icy storm had blown, wreaking havoc in her heart. Do you feel it?
Ah.
The sacrificial artifact, the Blood Soul Temple.
Boss.
Someone has made the sacrificial artifact, the Blood Soul Temple, and they're even modifying the framework. Ainley's eyes went wide.
Bang.
The empty wine glass shattered, and the shattered glass fragments scattered over Madame Halder's bathrobe and leg. Some of it even streaked across Ainley's cheek. But at this time, Ainley didn't even dare to blink. On Madame Halder's right cheek, there was a long and narrow bloodstain. It seemed as if blood was really going to flow out. Aside from that, her entire face was pale and transparent. There was a callous and crazy tension to it. She calmly gazed at the base of the glass. It was as if a new cup could grow out from the base at any time, or perhaps it could grow into an unknown shape. The unknown was the greatest fear. The members of the Blood Flame Order never avoided fear. They firmly believed that the blood flame was hidden deep within fear, giving them strength. But when their foundation was controlled by someone else, would the blood flame still protect them? Half a minute later, Madame Halder spoke with a surprisingly calm tone. Notify multifaceted. In an hour, I want all the video data of Xia City's central train station and its surroundings on the 14th. The range can extend to 30 square kilometers. Also, no matter what method she uses, no matter what price she wants us to pay, I need an opportunity to directly make contact with Luo Nan alone, without interference. Ainley was a bit stunned. Luo Nan. Madame Halder pursed her lips. Luo Nan. The first and vice-ablatums of the Blood Flame Order repeated the name Luo Nan back and forth. Several dozen kilometers away, in the 6th underground floor of Gear, Luo Nan clenched his fists within the simulation pod. It's done. His main consciousness was still 2,000 kilometers away in the volcanic region. Just a minute ago, when the polar domain cannon had annihilated the queen ant, a solid foundation had been erected. These were the thick and short stone pillars that had popped out earlier. They rose up one by one and firmly wedged themselves into the heart of the mutated nest. In a short few dozen seconds, the thick and short stone pillars had formed a scale in the heart of the Vulcan ant nest. They towered like a forest. Together, they constructed a primitive and rough foundation of an altar, allowing the illusory Blood Soul Temple to break through the boundary between the mental and the material. It also tore apart the defensive fortress of the Vulcan Ant Society and forcefully colonized it. It was a formal struggle for control over this enormous energy cycle system. The interior of the Vulcan ant nest's heart had already been flooded by the light and shadow of the Blood Soul Temple. It was remodeled, and beneath it, within the area encircled by the stone forest, a depression of magma that was clearly denser than the surroundings appeared in its embryonic form. The boiling magma within was no longer something that was purely on the material plane. Instead, it was mixed with an even more astonishing amount of heat and gas. It was like a pot of boiling oil. It constantly splashed outwards, but it did not exceed the range of the stone forest's control. Chapter 604. For the Blood Soul Temple, the bottom layer of the stone forest lava lake was a methane pool that absorbed and transformed the impurities of the outside world. It was also the cornerstone of the entire configuration. When the cornerstone was set, the nature of the entire configuration system became clear. Luo Nen finally found a foundation on the material plane for this structure that drifted on the mental plane of nothingness. Luo Nen wasn't sure if the Blood Flame Order's method mentioned this step, but he saw a similar suggestion from the user manual of the virtual brain system. From Luo Nan's perspective, it went without saying which side was more important. There was also the coincidental ecological and geographical environment of this volcanic area. There was also the urgent need for resources for the next step of the plan. Only then was there an operation. It hadn't even been a week since the start of the operation. Aside from feeling a bit frustrated with the design of the battle machinery, the overall operation was quite smooth, especially the success of the current critical segment in one fell swoop. This made the impatience and hesitation in Luo Nan's heart vanish into thin air. He was in a good mood, but the fire god ant's mutated nest was already clogged and impassable. When the Blood Soul Temple's stone forest lava lake took shape, it was as if a deadly malignant tumor had grown within the fire god ant nest's energy circulation system. It continuously extracted the surrounding heat energy and the life energy of the fire god ant colony, transforming them into nutrients needed by the Blood Soul Temple. The efficiency of this transformation wasn't particularly high for the time being, because the Blood Soul Temple needed to adapt to the environment and constantly adjust. But it was still a level higher than the fire god ant's crude energy circulation instincts. In addition, the fire god ant colony had entered the warring states period. Each ant room was divided and fought to the death. The group consciousness had yet to be reconstructed, and the originally smooth energy circulation system had become particularly rigid. There was practically no effective way to fight for the stone forest lava lake. More importantly, the formation of the stone forest lava lake represented the foundation of the Blood Soul Temple structure. In essence, it achieved isolation from the fire god ant nest. And since it didn't possess the aura of a living being, the group of fire god ants with low intelligence just assumed that it was a new structure formed from the compression and deformation of the volcano during an earthquake. Currently, the fire god ants used a single ant room as a base for internal strife. Their need for resources wasn't too urgent, so they didn't experience the problem of a single blocked node. At most, they weren't used to such an eyesore, but they didn't have any plans to attack, occupy, or transform it for the time being. They just let the stone forest lava lake suck their blood. This was the classic example of making a fortune in silence. Before the new fire god ant queen appears, there will most likely be peace for a period of time. This amount of time is still not enough. If the error in the calculation is not too big, I will need at least another 50 hours or so to complete the second and third levels and have a certain offensive and defensive ability. If there's a design problem, we'll have to delay it. Luo Nan's relaxed mood was not maintained for long. He was pressuring himself right now, flipping through his notes in the simulation chamber. His brain was spinning a bit faster than when he had slaughtered his way in. Not only can I not be quiet during this period of time, I can't let the Vulcan ants in the other ant rooms be quiet either. Interference, destruction, annexation. Not a single one can be left out. Oh, large-scale destruction is out of the question. Every resource is precious right now. TSK. Why does it look like an RTS game? But RTS should not include the design of the base and building core. As he ridiculed himself, Luo Nan continued to overcome his terrible translation obstacles. He operated the virtual brain system, performing half-baked simulations and calculations on the Blood Soul Temple that was being constructed. The Blood Soul Temple was a kind of configuration. Though it was complex to the point of making one's eyes pop out, and many elements of witchcraft and mystic arts were mixed in, its various layers of structure were pieced together. Even the thought process that appeared within was a relatively typical configuration rule and thought process. even if the level of each structure was uneven. There were countless dazzling flashes of brilliance, but there were also low-level mistakes that were unbearable to look at. Well, Luo Nan didn't have the qualifications to question the abilities of the first ablatum of the Blood Flame Order from his experience in the inner world. But the virtual brain system and its user manual possessed the ability to research and judge. That is, if this wasn't an absurd scam set up by his old man. Luo Nan had already confirmed through this period of learning and understanding that the virtual brain system hidden within the external neuron's main function was to serve the creation of the dynamo core and the spirit core. It was more inclined towards practical manufacturing techniques. It didn't have much knowledge regarding configuration design. It was just like how a decorator might not be good at interior design. But the configuration examples within the user manual and the series of configuration design data stored within the virtual brain system were all the most typical, the most characteristic, and the most standard cases. Luo Nan used these cases as a reference to understand the most stringent criteria for judging configurations. What was a qualified configuration? How to discover flaws in a configuration, where problems were easy to occur in complex configurations, and how to make adjustments during concrete production, and so on. These were all extremely valuable parts of the virtual brain system and its accompanying user manual. After many days of reading and learning, Luo Nan's horizons had been greatly broadened from a newbie who didn't understand a thing. At the very least, he possessed the most basic aesthetic ability in this field. Now, he had entered the stage of learning how to walk under the support of the system. There was a proper term for this stage. It was called having high expectations but low ability. Looking at countless cases, Luo Nan felt that his chest was beautiful, but when he truly got down to it, it was a long story. It's time to move the seed imprint over. Luo Nan gave an order to Mo Luan, who was hiding in the depths of the void. Mo Luan's current soul body of black smoke had already reached the acme of concealment as a pure energy construct. He quietly extracted the wreckage of the electromagnetic Vanguard 1 from the depths of the lava without alarming the Vulcan ant colony. Under Luo Nan's instructions, Mo Luan tore away the useless parts of the wreckage, leaving only the head module intact. The virtual brain system drove the Divine Binding Hoop module to realize a self-inspection interface refresh. Right now, the head armor played the role of a protective shell. According to the results of the self-inspection, the outer tantalum alloy armor was perfectly preserved. Luo Nan was relieved as he ordered Mo Luan to place the helmet into the lake of lava in the forest of stone lava. After the helmet entered the lake, it floated in the center of the lake of lava, rolling endlessly. Right now, the color of the boiling lava in the area of the lake of lava in the forest of stone lava was quite distinct from other areas. The color inside grew brighter and brighter. It gradually turned from dark red to bright red, orange, golden yellow, and finally suffused with white light. Dark veins of blood seeped through the interior. This meant that the temperature of the lake of lava was rising. Basically, the temperature of the lava exposed to the air was 1,300 degrees at most. But under high pressure and other special environments, it was a different story. For example, right now, the Divine Binding Hoop's self-inspection interface instantly sent back the temperature information of 1,700 degrees. This was due to the special configuration of the Blood Soul Temple. After absorbing Luo Nan's soul strength and many other layers of energy, it had an interference effect on the plane of reality. In such an environment, the harassment and infiltration of the Vulcan ants could be avoided. The seed imprint could also learn how to efficiently absorb and utilize energy. It could gradually mold and restore the powerful structure and instincts that originated from the golden tree. Luo Nan went to look at the data of the helmet armor. The research and development of the tantalum alloy was originally for the purpose of probing the surface of the sun. It could withstand a high temperature of over 5,000 degrees. This military material had to take into account more performance indicators. There were some trade-offs. The current upper limit of the helmet's heat resistance was approximately 4,000 degrees. The upper limit of the heat insulation was 2,000 degrees. It was absolutely safe. The magnetic energy core inside would not be destroyed. But the problem was that complete heat insulation was not right. Why is the magma lake only 1,700 degrees? Luo Nan smacked his head with his notebook. As mentioned before, Luo Nan did not find any basis for the true structure of the Blood Soul Temple from the Blood Flame Order. He completely relied on the virtual brain system and the user manual. He gradually estimated the input data and used its simulation calculation function to re-estimate the design. The virtual brain system was very powerful, but Luo Nan was a complete armchair strategist. The specifics would depend on the actual situation. Looking at the temperature of the core of the magma lake, there was still a problem. The energy needed to restore the golden tree seed imprint to its peak state was undoubtedly astronomical. At the same time, there must be an efficient mode to control this astronomical amount of energy. Both were indispensable. Luo Nan had painstakingly built the forward base and assembled electromagnetic Vanguard 1. He had gone in a large circle to bring it over. He had squeezed out and revived its combat instincts to the greatest degree. He had cultivated it externally and strengthened it internally in preparation for its rapid growth. For this reason, he followed the basic design of the Blood Soul Temple to simulate and improve a set of gradual absorption and utilization of energy. The front was fine, but there was a problem with the absorption and utilization of heat energy. The efficiency had to be cut by at least half. Could it be that the interference strength isn't enough? But if I were to increase it further, the thermal efficiency coefficient would be too ugly. In the end, I still haven't broken through the critical point. Luo Nan had to admit that there was still a problem with his design. He had the calculation formula, the system simulator, and all sorts of cases to refer to, but he still couldn't do it well. This was a bit shameful. There was nothing he could do even if it was shameful. Right now, he could only verify and calculate anew to see if there were any problems with the modified configuration design from before. This made the work even more complicated. It was even more difficult than attacking the fire god ant nest. Luo Nan calculated until the sky was dark and the earth was dark under the double blockade of the calculation formula and the structure. He was completely unaware of the passage of time. Perhaps he slept in the middle, or perhaps he didn't. In any case, he was muddle-headed. His mind suddenly stirred, and a moment later, the alarm of the simulator rang. Someone came in. It was Rue 1. Luo Nan slapped the notebook against his head. He decided to go out and get some fresh air. When the simulator opened, he saw a little girl carrying a food container that was over half a meter tall. She was waiting outside. Oh my, thanks. Luo Nan first revealed a smile. Then he came to a realization. Didn't you say that I don't need to deliver food? Breakfast. Rue 1 responded simply. Oh, it's morning already? Luo Nan looked at his watch. It was already 8:30 in the morning on the 22nd. Countless formulas and basic structures spun before Luo Nan's eyes. Comparatively speaking, the feeling of his stomach was more real, especially after he saw the half-meter-tall multi-layered food container. He was really hungry. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.